You are 7 years old when they first put a sword in your hands. It's wooden, heavier than you expected, and within an hour, your palms are bleeding. Welcome to your childhood, the last one you'll ever have. The year is 1347, and the world is a harder place than the songs suggest. England is locked in what will become known as the 100 Years' War, though no one calls it that yet. They simply call it Tuesday. War is the natural state of things. As constant as rain and twice as cold, you are born into nobility, which means you are born into service, and service begins early, very early. Your father's castle sits on a hill overlooking the Yorkshire moors, gray stone against gray sky, as permanent and unforgiving as winter itself. It's not the fairy tale fortress of later stories. There are no gleaming towers or colorful banners fluttering in gentle breezes. This is a working fortress, built for killing and dying, and every stone knows it. The walls are thick enough to stop siege engines, the windows narrow enough to shoot arrows through, and the halls cold enough to remind you that comfort is earned, not given. Your father, Lord Edmund de Blackwood, is a man carved from the same stone as his castle. He has fought in Scotland, in France, in Ireland, and in a dozen border disputes, whose names have been forgotten by everyone except the widows. His hands are scarred, his back is bent from wearing armor for 30 years, and his eyes hold the particular emptiness that comes from watching too many friends die badly. He loves you in his way, but love in the 14th century is a practical thing. It means preparing you to survive. Your mother died when you were 5, during the difficult birth of a brother who lived only 3 days. You remember her as warmth and soft singing, but memories fade quickly when there's no one left to share them. Now the castle is run by your father's sister, Aunt Margaret, a woman whose marriage ended with her husband's death at the Battle of Neville's Cross. She knows what happens to women when their protectors die, and she's determined to make sure you never fail in that duty. Sir William de Grey arrives on a Tuesday morning in October, when the leaves are turning and the air tastes of coming winter. He's a knight in service to your father, a man whose reputation for training young nobles precedes him like the smell of rain. He's 43 years old, which makes him ancient by medieval standards, and he's survived more battles than most men ever see. His face is a map of old wounds. A scar from a mace across his left cheek, another from a sword thrust that nearly took his ear, and the telltale white line across his throat where someone once came very close to ending his story permanently. Sir William doesn't smile when he meets you. He looks at your soft hands, your clean clothes, your round face, still carrying the fullness of childhood, and you can see him calculating how long it will take to strip all of that away. "This is the boy?" he asks your father, as if you're not standing right there. Your father nods. "He'll do," Sir William says, which is not quite the same as saying he'll succeed. Your training begins immediately, because mercy is a luxury that dead knights can't afford their sons. The wooden sword is placed in your hands before you've even finished your morning porridge. It's carved from ash, about 3 feet long, and weighted to feel like the real thing. The grip is wrapped in leather that's been worn smooth by other small hands. Other boys who stood where you're standing now. Some of them, Sir William tells you later, didn't make it to their first real battle. Others died in training. A few simply broke and were sent home to become clerks or merchants, which Sir William considers a fate worse than death. The sword is impossibly heavy. Your 7-year-old arms shake after holding it for just a few minutes, and when Sir William tells you to swing it, the momentum nearly pulls you off your feet. You stumble, catch yourself, try again. The blade whistles through the air and jerks your shoulder when you try to stop it. Within 10 minutes, your hands are cramping. Within 20, they're bleeding where the leather grip has rubbed your soft palms raw. "Good," Sir William says, watching blood seep between your fingers. "Pain is your first teacher. It will teach you faster than I ever could." He's right, though you don't understand it yet. The pain teaches you to grip differently, to move your body in ways that distribute the weight, to find your balance when the sword wants to pull you sideways. It teaches you that your body is not your own anymore. It belongs to the blade, to the armor you'll someday wear, to the horse you'll someday ride into battle. Your comfort matters less than your competence. and your competence is measured in blood and bruises. Brother Marcus appears on your third day of training. He's 9 years old, which makes him practically ancient in your eyes, and he's been training under Sir William for 2 years. His hands are calloused, his arms ropey with the beginnings of real muscle, and he moves with the careful precision of someone who's learned that mistakes hurt. He's assigned to help you, which really means he's assigned to watch you fail, and occasionally keep you from killing yourself in the process. The trick, he whispers during a break, when Sir William is shouting at another boy whose form has gone to pieces, is to pretend it doesn't hurt, even when it does, especially when it does. He shows you his palms, crossed with old scars and fresh calluses. First month is the worst. After that, you stop feeling it so much. Marcus becomes your guide through this strange new world, where childhood has been replaced by something harder and less forgiving. He shows you how to wrap your hands to prevent the worst of the blistering. He teaches you which foods will keep your strength up during the long training sessions. Most importantly, he shows you how to cry silently, because tears are inevitable, but showing them is dangerous. Old Thomas, the castle's master-at-arms, watches over everything with the careful eye of a man who's seen too many boys come and go. He's 60 years old, which makes him practically immortal by medieval standards, and he's trained 3 generations of knights. His own fighting days ended when a mace took the sight in his left eye and left him with a permanent limp, but his hands are still steady and his memory for technique is flawless. Thomas doesn't speak much, but when he does, everyone listens. He's the one who notices when you're favoring your left shoulder after a particularly brutal sparring session. He's the one who quietly adjusts your stance when Sir William isn't looking, saving you from developing habits that could get you killed later. And he's the one who finds you behind the armory after your first week, when the pain and homesickness and sheer overwhelming terror of what you've gotten yourself into finally break through your carefully maintained composure. Cried myself to sleep every night for a month, he tells you, settling down beside you with a grunt. Thought about running away twice. Actually tried it once, but they caught me before I made it to the village. He's quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the castle walls red. You know what kept me here? You shake your head, not trusting your voice. Pride, he says. Stupid, really. But I couldn't stand the thought of all those other boys seeing me quit. So I stayed. And then one day I realized I wasn't staying because I was afraid to leave. I was staying because I wanted to be here. The training intensifies as the weeks pass. Your body adapts in ways you didn't know were possible. Your soft hands harden into something that can grip a sword for hours without complaint. Your shoulders broaden to bear the weight of mail and plate. Your legs strengthen from the constant drill of stance and movement. You learn to walk differently, to carry yourself with the balanced readiness of someone who might need to fight at any moment. The wooden sword becomes an extension of your arm, then of your will. You learn the basic cuts, overhead, diagonal, horizontal, until you can execute them in your sleep. You learn to parry, to riposte, to move your feet in the patterns that keep you alive when someone is trying to kill you. You learn that fighting is not about strength or speed, though both matter. It's about timing, about reading your opponent, about being where they don't expect you to be when they commit to an attack. But the most important lesson comes on a cold November morning, 6 weeks into your training, when everything changes in the space of a heartbeat. You're sparring with a boy named Jeffrey, who's 10 years old and has been training for 3 years. He's bigger than you, stronger, and he knows it. He's been using that advantage to humiliate you daily, landing hits that leave bruises, tripping you when Sir William isn't looking, generally making your life miserable in the way that older boys have tormented younger ones since the beginning of time. Today, something is different. Maybe it's the accumulation of weeks of pain and frustration. Maybe it's the way Jeffrey smirks as he knocks you down for the 3rd time. Maybe it's simply that your body has finally learned what your mind has been trying to teach it. Whatever the reason, when Jeffrey comes at you with his usual overconfident swing, you see it coming like it's moving through honey. You step aside, not far, just enough, and bring your wooden sword around in a perfect horizontal cut that catches Jeffrey square in the nose. The crack of wood on cartilage echoes across the training yard. Blood explodes from his nostrils, spattering both of you with red. Geoffrey drops his sword and falls backward, hands clutched to his face, making sounds like a wounded animal. The yard goes silent. Even Sir William stops shouting at the other boys to stare at you. Geoffrey is crying now, blood streaming between his fingers, and you realize with a mixture of horror and satisfaction that you've hurt him badly. More than that, you've won. For the first time since you picked up a sword, you've actually won. Sir William walks over slowly, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground. He looks down at Geoffrey, then at you, then at the blood on your sword. His face gives away nothing, but you can see something like approval in his eyes. "Well done," he says quietly, and those two words transform everything. Clean your blade. That night, old Thomas finds you in the armory, carefully oiling your wooden sword as you've been taught. He doesn't say anything at first, just watches you work. Finally, he nods toward your weapon. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he asks. You consider this. The sword does feel different, not just as a tool for training, but as something real, something dangerous, something that can hurt people if you want it to. "Yes, sir," you say. "Good," Thomas replies, "because it is different. Today you stopped being a boy learning to fight. Today you became a fighter learning to kill. The real training starts tomorrow." He's right, of course. Everything changes after that moment. Sir William's instruction becomes more serious, more focused on techniques that are designed not just to score touches in practice, but to end lives in reality. The other boys treat you differently too, not with friendship exactly, but with a grudging respect. You've proven that you can hurt someone when you need to, and in this world, that matters more than almost anything else. By winter's end, your hands are permanently scarred with calluses. Your body has lengthened and hardened in ways that make you look older than your 8 years. You move with the unconscious confidence of someone who knows how to use the weapon at his side. The wooden sword feels lighter now. Or perhaps you've simply grown strong enough to wield it properly. But the most important change is internal. The soft, frightened boy who first picked up a sword is gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. You've learned to endure pain without complaint, to push through exhaustion when your body wants to quit, to hit back when someone hurts you. These are valuable lessons, though you don't yet understand the price you've paid for them. Standing in the training yard, as the first flowers of spring begin to push through the melting snow, you realize that Sir William and old Thomas were right about everything. The wooden sword no longer feels like a burden. It feels like an opportunity. Your calloused hands no longer ache. They itch for something more challenging than practice. You're no longer a child learning to fight. You're a fighter learning to kill, and the real training hasn't even begun. At 14, they dress you in 40 pounds of metal and tell you to run. You fall face first into the mud within 10 steps. The laughter echoes off the castle walls, but you're no longer listening. You're learning to breathe inside a coffin. 5 years have passed since you first picked up that wooden sword. 5 years of bruises and blood and gradual hardening. Your body has stretched upward and outward, your shoulders broadened by constant training, your hands permanently scarred by grip and blade. The boy who cried behind the armory is gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who sleeps with his sword within reach and wakes at the first sound of movement in the corridor outside his chamber. You are a squire now, which sounds like a promotion until you realize it means the real suffering can finally begin. Where pages learn to endure, squires learn to kill. Where pages polish armor, squires wear it. Where pages watch battles from a distance, squires ride into them and try to come back alive. Sir Aldrich the Bold becomes your knightmaster, and the name fits him like his battle-scarred armor. He survived 12 major engagements, 3 sieges, and a tournament circuit that left 2 men dead and a dozen more permanently maimed. His face is a roadmap of old wounds, a sword cut across his jaw, a mace dent in his forehead, and the puckered scar where a crossbow bolt punched through his cheek and took 3 teeth with it. He's 35 years old, which makes him ancient by warrior standards, and every day he doesn't die in battle is borrowed time that he spends making sure you're ready to die in his place if necessary. Armor, Sir Aldrich announces on your first morning as his squire, is not protection. It's a test. Every day you wear it, it asks the same question. Are you strong enough to deserve it? The answer, initially, is no. The mail hauberk they drape over your shoulders weighs more than you expected metal could weigh. It's made of thousands of interlocking rings, each one riveted closed, each one adding its small burden to the crushing total. The shirt hangs to your knees, and when you try to walk, it clings to your legs like liquid iron. Beneath it, you wear a padded gambeson that's supposed to prevent the mail from grinding your skin raw. It doesn't work very well, but mail is just the beginning. Over the hauberk comes a coat of plates, articulated pieces of steel that cover your chest and back. Greaves protect your shins, sabatons encase your feet, and vambraces guard your forearms. Each piece must be strapped on correctly, each buckle tested, each joint checked for proper movement. Your squire duties now include not just maintaining Sir Aldrich's equipment, but learning to wear your own without dying in the process. The helmet is the worst part. It's a close helm that covers your entire head, with only a narrow slit for vision and small holes for breathing. When you put it on, the world becomes a narrow strip of light, surrounded by suffocating darkness. Your own breathing sounds like a bellows in your ears. Sweat immediately begins to pool in the bottom, and within minutes, the metal steams up with your own exhalations. Fighting in it is like trying to duel while looking through a keyhole and breathing through a straw. Marcus, now 16 and a veteran squire himself, watches your first attempts at armored movement with the grim satisfaction of someone who's forgotten how hard it was. He's grown tall and lean, his face sharp with the angles of approaching manhood, and he moves in his mail like it weighs nothing at all. You envy him until you remember that he's also covered in scars you didn't notice when you were younger. A white line across his sword arm where a blade found the gap in his armor. A dent in his left temple where a mace connected during a particularly brutal training session. The trick, he tells you during a brief rest, both of you sitting in the mud and breathing hard, is to stop thinking of it as something you're wearing. It's not clothes. It's not even armor, really. It's skin. Metal skin that keeps you alive. You try to think of it that way, but the mail chafes despite the gambeson padding, the plates pinch when you move wrong, and the helmet makes everything feel like you're watching the world through a tunnel. Every step is deliberate, every movement calculated. You can't scratch an itch without removing a gauntlet. You can't wipe sweat from your eyes without lifting your visor. Even sitting down becomes a complex negotiation between metal plates that want to dig into each other and your flesh. The weapon training intensifies accordingly. The wooden practice swords are replaced with steel, not sharp enough to cut easily, but heavy enough to break bones if you're careless. Your wooden shield is replaced with one of iron and leather that weighs more than your entire practice kit used to. Every technique you learned as a page must be relearned in armor, because metal changes everything about how you move, how you balance, how you think. Sir Aldrich watches everything with the cold evaluation of a man who's seen too many squires die because they couldn't adapt fast enough. He corrects your stance with sharp raps from his own practice sword, adjusts your grip with blows that leave your knuckles aching, and stops fights when he sees you developing habits that will get you killed in real combat. You're fighting the armor. He tells you after a particularly clumsy session where you've fallen 3 times and failed to land a single clean hit. The armor isn't your enemy. The man trying to put a sword through your eye is your enemy. The armor is what keeps that from happening. Young Edmund arrives that autumn, a 7-year-old page who looks exactly like you did 5 years ago. Soft hands, round face, eyes wide with terror and wonder. Watching him struggle with his first wooden sword brings back memories you'd rather forget, and you realize with uncomfortable clarity how much you've changed. The boy who cried behind the armory would be unrecognizable to you now. You help Edmund when Sir William isn't looking, showing him the small tricks that make the difference between endurance and collapse. How to wrap his hands to prevent the worst blistering, which foods will sustain him through long training sessions, how to cry silently when the pain becomes too much to bear. You see yourself in his frightened eyes, and you remember old Thomas's words about pride and belonging. But mostly you focus on your own training, because the armor and weapons are just the beginning. Real combat is coming. Everyone knows it. The war with France continues to simmer, Border disputes flare regularly, and Sir Aldrich has been called upon twice already for minor skirmishes that could easily escalate into major battles. As his squire, you'll ride with him, and when he fights, you'll be expected to keep him alive or die trying. The day everything changes begins like any other. You're in the practice yard, working through sword forms in full armor, when Marcus's training session goes wrong. He's sparring with another squire, both of them using live steel with blunted edges, both of them confident enough to push the boundaries of safety. You've seen dozens of these sessions before. They usually end with bruises and wounded pride, nothing more serious. But today, Marcus's opponent, a boy named Stephen who's been training for 4 years and thinks he knows everything, overcommits to a thrust that Marcus easily sidesteps. Stephen's momentum carries him forward, off balance, and Marcus's counter thrust is perfectly timed and perfectly placed. The blunted point of his sword punches through the gap between Stephen's breastplate and his arm guard, sliding into the vulnerable hollow beneath his shoulder. It should have been a touch, a point scored in practice. Instead, there's blood, a lot of blood. Stephen drops his sword and staggers backward, his left arm hanging useless, crimson streaming down his side. The blunted point may not have been sharp enough to cut cleanly, but it was pointed enough to punch through the mail beneath his plate armor and tear the flesh beneath. Marcus drops his own sword immediately, his face going white as he realizes what's happened. Stephen falls to his knees, pressing his right hand against the wound, but the blood keeps flowing between his fingers. In the sudden silence of the practice yard, you can hear his breathing become rapid and shallow, the sound of someone whose body is beginning to shut down. Everyone freezes. Stephen is dying in front of you, and the older squires seem as paralyzed as the younger pages. Sir William is shouting orders, but he's on the other side of the yard. Sir Aldrich is in the castle, meeting with your father. The few seconds that might save Stephen's life are ticking away while everyone stands and stares. You move without thinking, dropping your own practice sword and running to Stephen's side. Your armored footsteps ring against the cobblestones as you slide to your knees beside him. The wound is bad. The torn mail has created a jagged hole in his side, and you can see muscle and possibly bone beneath the flowing blood. But it's not immediately fatal if the bleeding can be stopped. Your training takes over, not the sword work but the field medicine that Sir Aldrich has drilled into you. Direct pressure on the wound, elevation if possible. Keep the victim conscious and still. You press both hands against Stephen's side, feeling warm blood seep between your gauntleted fingers. The metal plates of your armor make it awkward, but you maintain pressure while shouting for someone to bring clean cloth. Marcus snaps out of his paralysis and runs for the castle, calling for the physician. Edmund, the young page, appears beside you with strips of linen torn from his own shirt. You pack the cloth against the wound, maintaining pressure, talking to Stephen in what you hope is a calm voice. His breathing is steadying, the blood flow slowing, and some color is returning to his face. By the time Sir William reaches you, followed by the castle's physician, Stephen is conscious and stable. The wound will need stitching and careful watching for infection, but he'll live. As they carry him away, Sir Aldrich appears at your shoulder, watching the blood-soaked practice yard with thoughtful eyes. "Well done," he says quietly. "Quick thinking under pressure. That's what keeps people alive in real combat." That night, as you're cleaning Stephen's blood from your gauntlets, Marcus finds you in the armory. His face is still pale, and his hands shake slightly as he helps you with the stubborn stains. "I could have killed him," he says quietly. "One mistake, one moment of overconfidence, and I nearly murdered my friend." You look at him, this boy who's been your guide and companion for 7 years, and realize that he's learning the same lesson you learned today. The training is no longer about preparation. It's about life and death. The weapons are no longer tools. They're instruments of survival or destruction. The armor is no longer a burden. It's the thin metal shell that stands between you and the grave. But you didn't, you tell him. And now you'll never make that mistake again. He nods, but you can see the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow, when you put on your armor and pick up your sword, it won't be practice anymore. It will be rehearsal for the moment when someone tries to kill you. Then you have to kill them first. That night, polishing the blood-stained mail, you understand the truth. Armor doesn't make you invincible. It just makes your death more expensive. And tomorrow, they're teaching you to kill from horseback. The first man you kill has brown eyes and a crooked smile. He's trying to surrender when your lance punches through his chest. You're 16, and you've just discovered that taking a life is surprisingly easy. Living with it is the hard part. The border skirmish that changes everything begins on a gray morning in March, when the mist clings to the Scottish hills like smoke from a dying fire. You've been Sir Aldrich's squire for 2 years now. And while you've accompanied him on patrols and garrison duties, this is your first real taste of combat. The Scots have been raiding English farms for weeks, taking cattle and grain, burning what they can't carry. Lord Cumberland has finally had enough and assembled a force to hunt them down. It's not a glorious campaign from the songs. There are no banners flying, no trumpets sounding, no speeches about honor and glory, just 40 men on horseback riding through the morning cold, their breaths steaming in the air, their armor creaking with each step of their mounts. You ride behind Sir Aldrich, close enough to assist him if needed, far enough back to stay out of his way. Your own armor feels heavier than usual, and your lance seems impossibly long and unwieldy. The Scottish raiders we're hunting are nothing like the noble enemies of romance tales. They're desperate men driven south by famine and war, taking what they need to survive the winter. Most are barely armed, a few rusty swords, some axes taken from woodpiles, spears that were farming tools until yesterday. They're not warriors, they're hungry men with families to feed and nothing left to lose. You find them in a valley beside a stream, dividing the spoils from their latest raid. 20 men, maybe 25, gathered around a fire with a dozen stolen cattle and several sacks of grain. They see your force coming down the hill and know immediately that they're outnumbered and outmatched. Some grab weapons, others look for escape routes, but most simply stand there with the resigned look of men who've run out of options. Captain Mortimer, a grizzled veteran who's been fighting Scots for longer than you've been alive, raises his hand to halt the charge. For a moment, you think he might offer terms, might allow them to surrender their plunder and withdraw across the border. It would be the merciful thing to do, and mercy is supposedly part of the knightly code you've been learning. But mercy is a luxury that border warfare rarely affords. These men have been terrorizing English farms for months. They've killed English farmers, burned English barns, stolen English livestock. Letting them go would simply encourage more raids. Captain Mortimer's decision is made before the Scots even have time to form up their pathetic battle line. No quarter, he calls back to your formation. They're raiders, not soldiers. Put them down. Sir Aldrich nods grimly and spurs his horse forward. You follow, your lance lowered, your heart hammering against your ribs. This is what you've trained for, what every hour of practice and pain has been building toward. The moment when all the theory becomes reality, when the wooden swords become steel, when the training dummies become men who bleed and die. The charge covers the distance to the Scottish position in seconds that feel like hours. Your horse's hooves thunder against the soft ground, throwing up clods of mud and grass. Your lance point waves as you try to control the weapon while guiding your mount toward the cluster of terrified men below. The Scots scatter like startled birds, some running for the stream, others trying to form a defensive line with their makeshift weapons. You pick your target almost by accident. A young man with brown hair and a face that might have been handsome under different circumstances. He's holding a woodsman's axe and wearing nothing more protective than a leather jerkin. When he sees you bearing down on him, he drops the axe and raises his hands, his mouth opening in what might be a plea for mercy or simply a cry of fear. It doesn't matter. Your lance is already committed, your horse's momentum carrying you forward faster than thought. The iron point takes him center mass, punching through his jerkin and the flesh beneath with a sound like a wet branch breaking. The impact jars your arm all the way to the shoulder, and for a moment, you're face to face with him, close enough to see the surprise in his brown eyes, close enough to smell the fear sweat on his skin. He tries to say something, blood bubbling from his mouth, but the words are lost in the chaos around you. His hands close weakly around the shaft of your lance, not trying to pull it out, but simply holding on, as if the weapon connecting you might somehow anchor him to life. Then his eyes go blank and his grip loosens. and you're pulling your lance free and wheeling your horse to look for the next target. The entire fight lasts less than 10 minutes. The Scots, outnumbered and outmatched, break and run almost immediately. A few make it to the stream and escape into the marshland beyond. Most don't. When the killing stops, 23 Scottish bodies lie scattered around the abandoned campfire, their blood seeping into the muddy ground. Your force has lost no one and suffered only minor injuries. A few cuts, some bruises, nothing that won't heal. You sit on your horse in the aftermath, staring down at the body of the man you killed. He looks younger in death, maybe your own age or close to it. The crooked smile that might have charmed girls at market fairs is frozen on his lips, though his eyes stare sightlessly at the gray sky. His hands are calloused from honest work, farming probably, or woodcutting. The kind of hands that built barns rather than burned them. Sir Aldrich rides up beside you, following your gaze to the corpse at your horse's feet. "First kill?" he asks, his voice matter-of-fact. You nod, not trusting yourself to speak. Your throat feels tight, and there's a strange ringing in your ears that has nothing to do with the clash of weapons. The lance in your hand feels heavier than it did during the charge, weighted with something more than iron and wood. "Clean kill," Sir Aldrich observes, with the professional detachment of a man who's made such evaluations hundreds of times. "Center mass, quick death. He didn't suffer much. It's meant to be comforting, you suppose, but it doesn't help. The man is still dead, and you're still the one who killed him. The training that made the thrust automatic, the muscle memory that guided your lance to its target, all of it feels suddenly hollow. They taught you how to kill efficiently, but no one taught you how to feel about it afterward." Captain Mortimer approaches, surveying the battlefield with satisfaction. "Good work, lads," he calls to the assembled riders. "Clean sweep. We'll drag the bodies to the stream and let the water take them. No point in digging graves for raiders. The casual disposal of the dead strikes you as wrong somehow, though you can't articulate why. These men were your enemies, certainly. They were raiders and thieves who'd been terrorizing innocent farmers. But they were also human beings, and something in you rebels against treating them like refuse to be swept away." As if reading your thoughts, Captain Mortimer stops beside you. He's a hard man, scarred by decades of border warfare, but his eyes aren't unkind. "First time seeing combat up close?" he asks. "Yes, sir." "Bothered by it?" You consider lying, claiming the indifference that seems expected of you. But something in the captain's manner suggests he's been where you are now, that he remembers what it felt like to take a life for the first time. "A little, sir." He nods. "Good. Day you stop being bothered by killing is the day you stop being human. But don't let it paralyze you. These men chose their path when they crossed the border with weapons in their hands. You chose yours when you swore to defend your lord's lands. Sometimes those paths cross, and when they do, only one man walks away." That night, camped beside a shepherd's hut 20 miles from the battlefield, you find yourself staring into the fire and seeing brown eyes in the flames. Sir Aldrich sits beside you, cleaning his weapons with the methodical precision of long practice. The other men are sharing ale and recounting the day's action, their voices growing louder and more boastful with each round. "You're thinking about him," Sir Aldrich says without looking up from his sword. "It's not a question, so you don't answer, but you don't deny it either." "What was his name?" Sir Aldrich continues. "I don't know." "Where was he from?" "I don't know that either." "Did he have a family? A wife? Children?" "I don't know." Your voice is barely above a whisper. Sir Aldrich sheathes his sword and turns to face you fully. "Those are the questions that will drive you mad if you let them. You can spend your whole life wondering about the men you've killed, imagining their stories, mourning their unlived futures. Or you can accept that war makes killers of us all, and the only choice we have is whether to be good killers or dead ones." You stare into the fire, watching the flames dance. "How many men have you killed?" "I stopped counting after the first dozen. That was 15 years ago." "Does it get easier?" Sir Aldrich is quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "No," he says finally. "But you get stronger, and you learn to carry the weight without letting it break you. The next morning, you wake before dawn and walk to the stream where the bodies were disposed of. The water has carried most of them away, but a few remain caught on rocks or tangled in the reeds. Among them is the young man with brown eyes, his body pale and still in the gray water. Fish have already begun to nibble at his exposed skin. You stand there for a long time, watching the stream flow past, carrying pieces of yesterday's violence toward the sea. When you finally turn away, something has changed inside you. The boy who rode out on yesterday's patrol is gone, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. Someone who knows that killing is easy, and living with it afterward is the real challenge. Captain Mortimer finds you beside your horse, checking your lance for damage that isn't there. Ready to ride, lad? You nod, swinging yourself into the saddle. The lance feels normal in your hand again, neither heavier nor lighter than it should be. Just a tool for doing what needs to be done. Good, the captain says, because this was just the beginning. Words come from the south. The French are stirring again. Real war this time, not just border raids. You'll have plenty more chances to prove yourself. As you ride south toward whatever new violence awaits, you think about Sir Aldrich's words. War makes killers of us all. The only choice is whether to be good killers or dead ones. Yesterday you made that choice, and you're still alive to regret it. That will have to be enough. They teach you about chivalry in the castle courtyard, but they don't mention that starving peasants taste like pork when you're burning their village for grain. Honor, you learn, is a luxury you can't afford when your army hasn't eaten in 3 days. The siege of Harfleur begins with grand intentions and noble proclamations. King Edward's army has crossed the Channel to reclaim what he calls his rightful inheritance in France. And you ride with Sir Aldrich as part of a force that's supposed to bring glory to England and honor to God. The banners fly bright in the summer sun. The armor gleams, and the songs the minstrels sing make it all sound like the greatest adventure in Christendom. That was 3 months ago. Now it's October. The siege has stretched far longer than anyone expected, and the army that landed with such confidence is slowly starving in the muddy fields outside a city that refuses to fall. The French have burned the countryside for miles around, leaving nothing for foraging. Supply ships from England are weeks overdue, probably sunk by storms or French raiders. The men are eating their horses, then their belts, then whatever they can forage from a landscape picked cleaner than a battlefield corpse. You're 18 now, no longer the wide-eyed squire who killed his first man 2 years ago. 2 more campaigns have hardened you into something that barely resembles the boy who once cried behind the armory. Your face is thinner, marked by a scar from a French crossbow bolt that came too close, and your eyes hold the particular emptiness that comes from watching too many friends die badly. Sir Aldrich still commands, but age and wounds are slowing him down, and more often now, you find yourself making decisions that should be his to make. The orders come down on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a messenger whose own hollowed cheeks tell the story of the army's hunger. Sir Aldrich reads the parchment twice, his face growing darker with each word. When he looks up, his expression tells you everything you need to know before he speaks. We're to requisition supplies from the village of St. Pierre, he says quietly. All available grain, livestock, and preserved foods, by order of the king. St. Pierre sits in a valley 5 miles east of your position. A cluster of thatched roofs and stone walls that's managed to avoid the worst of the war so far. The villagers have been smart. They've paid tribute to both sides, kept their heads down, and avoided taking any actions that might draw unwanted attention. It's exactly the kind of pragmatic neutrality that keeps small communities alive when armies clash around them. Brother Benedict, the army chaplain who's been arguing against harsh foraging for weeks, appears at Sir Aldrich's shoulder, as if summoned by the discussion. He's a thin man with the pale complexion of someone who spends too much time indoors reading scripture, but his eyes burn with the kind of moral certainty that makes him dangerous to ignore. This is theft, Benedict says without preamble. These people have done nothing to deserve having their winter stores stolen. They'll starve. Sir Aldrich's jaw tightens. The king's army will starve if we don't find food. Would you prefer we all die nobly while French peasants eat well? I would prefer we find another way, one that doesn't require us to become brigands in God's sight. God, Sir Aldrich replies with the bitter humor of a man who's prayed for victory through too many lost battles. seems to have taken a holiday from this particular campaign. If he wants to suggest alternatives to starving, I'm prepared to listen. You say nothing, but you're calculating. Saint Pierre probably has enough stored grain to feed your portion of the army for 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if you're careful about rationing. The villagers themselves will be left with barely enough to survive until spring, assuming they can find additional food sources and the winter isn't particularly harsh. It's a choice between certain suffering for them and probable death for your men. The village elder who meets your force at Saint Pierre's gates is a man named Willem, probably 60 years old, with the bent back and gnarled hands of someone who spent his life working the land. He's brought the village priest and 3 other men, all of them trying to project a confidence they obviously don't feel. You can see the fear in their eyes, the desperate hope that reasonable men can reach a reasonable accommodation. My lords, Willem begins, his French accented with the regional dialect that marks him as local born. We are loyal subjects of whoever rules here. We have little, but we're willing to share what we can spare. Sir Aldrich's expression doesn't change. We're not here to negotiate, old man. We're here to collect supplies for the king's army. You can cooperate and keep your lives, or you can resist and lose both your lives and your grain. Willem's face goes pale, but he doesn't back down. My lord, we need our stores to survive the winter. We can give you perhaps 1/3 of our grain, half our livestock. Please, be merciful. Mercy, Sir Aldrich says, is a luxury we can't afford. You'll provide everything we require, or we'll take it and burn your village for the inconvenience. The negotiation, such as it is, continues for another few minutes, but the outcome was never in doubt. Willem pleads. Brother Benedict mutters prayers under his breath, and you stand silent while watching children's faces peer out from behind shuttered windows. Eventually, Willem capitulates with the exhausted resignation of a man who's seen enough wars to know when resistance is futile. The collection begins immediately. Your men move through the village with systematic efficiency, emptying granaries, driving livestock from pens, taking preserved meats from smokehouses. The villagers watch in silence, some weeping quietly, others simply staring with the blank expressions of people whose world has just ended. You supervise the operation, making sure your soldiers don't take more than ordered and don't harm the civilians unnecessarily. It's a small mercy, but it's all you can offer. The real test comes when you enter Willem's own cottage, where his family has gathered to watch their winter disappear. His wife, a woman whose gray hair speaks of decades spent struggling against poverty and hardship, clutches a sack of seed grain to her chest like a mother protecting a child. Her eyes meet yours, and you see in them the same desperation you felt during your own hungry nights. Please, she whispers in French, then switches to broken English for your benefit. Please, children, winter long, need eat. Behind her skirts, 2 small faces peer out, a boy of maybe 6 and a girl who can't be more than 4. They're thin already, the kind of thinness that comes from rationing meals long before armies arrive to take what little remains. The seed grain their mother holds represents not just next year's crop, but the difference between survival and slow starvation. Sir Aldrich enters behind you, surveys the scene, and nods toward the sack. That too, he says. The woman's face crumples, but she doesn't release her grip. Please, Sir Knight, is all we have. Children die without. For a moment you hesitate. The weight of your sword seems insignificant compared to the weight of this choice. These people have done nothing wrong, except have food that your army needs. The children staring at you with huge, trusting eyes will go hungry because of decisions made by kings and generals they'll never meet. But your own men are starving too. Young Peter, the recruit who reminds everyone of their younger brothers, hasn't eaten a full meal in a week. Sergeant Morris, who taught you to fight and kept you alive through your first real battle, is so weak from hunger that he can barely lift his sword. If you show mercy here, you're condemning your own people to death. You step forward and gently take the sack from the woman's hands. She doesn't resist, there's no point, but the sound she makes is like an animal in pain. The children begin to cry, and their father turns away as if he can't bear to watch. That night, as your men feast on stolen grain and slaughtered livestock, you find yourself unable to eat. The bread tastes like ash, the meat like guilt. You slip away from the campfire and walk to where your personal supplies are stored. Your own rations, carefully hoarded against lean times, represent perhaps 3 days' worth of food for one person or 1 day's worth for a small family. You make your choice quickly, before rational thought can change your mind. Loading the food into a sack, you walk back towards St. Pierre under cover of darkness. The village is silent, but you can see firelight flickering behind Willem's shutters. You leave the sack beside his door, knock once, and disappear back into the shadows before anyone can see who delivered this small mercy. Sir Aldrich is waiting when you return to camp, sitting beside the dying fire and cleaning his sword with the methodical precision of long habit. He doesn't look up when you approach, but his voice carries clearly in the still air. Feeling better? He asks. There's no point in denying what you've done. Yes. Good. Now we can both pretend that chivalry still means something. He sheaths his sword and stands, his joints creaking with the sounds of a man who's carried armor too long. Brother Benedict will be pleased. He's been praying for our souls all evening. You stare into the dying embers, watching sparks rise toward the star-filled sky. Will they survive? Probably. Maybe. Does it matter? We took what we needed to keep our own people alive. Tomorrow we'll march to the next village and do it again. And keep doing it until this damned war ends or we all die. The next morning brings news that changes everything. A messenger arrived from the main army with word that King Edward has lifted the siege of Harfleur and is marching north toward Calais. Your force is to join the general movement, which means leaving this region and its slowly starving villages behind. As you ride away from St. Pierre, you catch a glimpse of Willem working in his devastated fields, trying to salvage something from the stubble left by your horses. He doesn't look up as you pass, but you see his wife watching from their doorway, her children pressed against her skirts. The sack you left is nowhere to be seen, probably already distributed among the neediest families. Brother Benedict rides beside you for a while, unusually quiet for a man who normally fills every silence with prayers or moral observations. Finally, he speaks without turning to look at you. You left them food. It's not a question, so you don't answer. It won't be enough, he continues. Some of them will still die this winter. Children, probably, the old and weak. I know. But you did what you could within the constraints of duty. That matters. God sees the mercy as clearly as he sees the necessity. You ride in silence for several miles, thinking about mercy and necessity, about the weight of choices made by men with swords in a world that offers only bad options. The French countryside rolls past, beautiful in the autumn light, marked by the scars of armies that have passed this way before and will pass again. That night, eating stolen bread while listening to distant weeping carried on the wind, you understand why so many knights turn to drink. The code of chivalry sounds noble until you're the one holding the sword, the one choosing between competing loyalties, the one who must live with the consequences of decisions made in extremity. Tomorrow brings news that changes everything. War is coming home. The French have assembled a great army, and King Edward means to meet them in battle somewhere near a small town called Crécy. Real war this time. Not raids or sieges, but the kind of decisive engagement that kingdoms rise and fall on. As you check your weapons and armor in preparation for what's coming, you realize that the starving villages and moral compromises have been preparing you for something larger. You've learned that honor is more complex than the songs suggest, that duty sometimes requires terrible choices, and that survival often depends on your willingness to do things that will haunt your dreams. The boy who once believed in simple answers to simple questions is gone, replaced by someone who understands that the world is painted in shades of gray rather than black and white. It's not the education you expected when you first picked up a sword, but it's the one you needed. And now, riding toward a battle that will determine the fate of kingdoms, you carry that education with you like armor against a world that offers no easy choices and asks no easy questions. At Crécy, you learn that all your training, all your honor, all your steel means nothing against a Welsh longbow, You watch the flower of French chivalry die in the mud in 15 minutes. This is the day knighthood begins to die. The field outside the village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu looks unremarkable on the morning of August 26, 1346. Rolling green hills dotted with trees. Good farmland that's produced grain and livestock for generations of French peasants who never imagined their quiet valley would become the graveyard of an entire way of life. King Edward has chosen his position carefully, a ridge that gives his archers clear fields of fire and forces any attack to come uphill against prepared positions. You're 19 now, officially knighted 3 days ago in a hasty ceremony that had none of the pageantry you'd imagined as a boy. Sir Aldrich performed the dubbing himself, tapping your shoulders with a sword still stained with blood from the previous day's skirmish. "Rise, sir," he said simply, and that was it. No feast, no celebration, just the weight of new responsibility settling on shoulders already burdened with too much experience. The French army that approaches across the valley is magnificent in the way that only medieval warfare can be magnificent. Thousands of knights in gleaming armor, their horses caparisoned in silk and gold, banners flying in the morning breeze like a forest of colored leaves. Count Geoffrey de Montmorency rides at their head, resplendent in armor that probably cost more than your father's entire estate, his lance point gleaming like a star. From your position with the English reserves, you can see it all: the careful deployment of crossbowmen, the massed ranks of heavy cavalry, the confident way the French nobles gesture and point as they plan what they assume will be a routine destruction of an outnumbered English force. They've done this before, after all. French heavy cavalry has dominated European battlefields for generations. Today should be no different. King Edward has positioned his longbowmen on the flanks, Welsh and English peasants with yew staves, who've been drilling for months in the deadly art of mass archery. They don't look like much, mostly young men in leather jerkins with calloused hands and the lean build of people who've never eaten enough. But you've seen them practice, watched arrows punch through mail at 200 yards, seen them loose 12 aimed shots in the time it takes a knight to gallop 50 yards. Sir Aldrich sits his horse beside you, his face grim beneath his helm. At 47, he's older than most knights ever get to be, and every one of those years shows in the way he holds himself, the careful movements of a man whose body has absorbed too much punishment. His armor bears the dents and scars of a dozen campaigns, and his sword hand trembles slightly, not from fear, but from old wounds that never healed properly. "This is wrong," he says quietly, watching the French deployment. "They're going to charge straight up that hill into a storm of arrows. It's suicide." You nod, studying the field. The French plan is obvious. Crossbowmen will advance first to suppress the English archers, followed by massed cavalry charges that will shatter the English line through sheer weight and momentum. It's the standard tactic that's worked for centuries, the foundation of French military dominance, except today it won't work. And you can see why, even if the French commanders apparently can't. The English archers are positioned to enfilade any advancing force, meaning arrows will strike the flanks of cavalry charges rather than just the front. The ground is soft from recent rain, which will slow the horses and make it harder for them to maintain formation. Most importantly, there are simply too many archers, at least 5,000 bowmen who can loose 15 arrows per minute each. The battle begins with the crossbowmen, Genoese mercenaries who advance in neat ranks toward the English position. They're professionals, well-equipped and experienced, but they're about to learn the difference between crossbows and longbows in the most painful way possible. A crossbow shoots farther and hits harder, but it takes 30 seconds to reload. A longbow shoots nearly as far and reloads in 5 seconds. The mathematics of slaughter are simple and brutal. As the Genoese advance into range, the Welsh archers loose their first volley. The sky darkens with arrows, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands, falling like deadly rain on the advancing crossbowmen. Before the Genoese can reload and return fire, 2 more volleys follow. Men fall screaming, others turn and run, and within minutes the entire advance has dissolved into chaos. Count Geoffrey, watching his expensive mercenaries break and flee, makes the decision that will haunt French military doctrine for generations. Rather than withdrawing and rethinking his approach, he orders his cavalry to charge through the retreating crossbowmen and overwhelm the archers through sheer audacity. The first charge is magnificent and terrible to watch. 3,000 French knights in perfect formation, lances leveled. Horses thundering across the valley floor like an avalanche of steel and flesh. The ground shakes beneath their hooves, and for a moment you can almost believe that nothing could stand against such magnificent fury. Then the arrows begin to fall. The Welsh bowmen have had months to practice this exact scenario. They loose in coordinated volleys, each man drawing and releasing in rhythm with his neighbors, creating a continuous rain of bodkin points that punch through mail like cloth. Horses scream and fall, throwing their riders into the mud. Knights struggling to rise in heavy armor are hit by second and third arrows before they can regain their feet. The charge falters, breaks, and retreats, leaving the field littered with the bodies of men and horses. But Count Geoffrey is not finished. He orders a second charge, then a third, then a fourth. Each attack follows the same pattern: magnificent advance, devastating archery, bloody retreat. By afternoon, the field is carpeted with French dead, and still the attacks continue. You watch Sir Aldrich's face grow paler with each failed charge. These aren't just enemies dying, they're fellow knights. Men who've trained as you've trained, who've sworn the same oaths and followed the same codes. The systematic destruction of everything knighthood represents is happening before your eyes, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. This isn't war, Sir Aldrich says quietly. This is butchery. The worst moment comes during the seventh charge, when Count Geoffrey himself leads his household knights in what everyone knows will be a final, desperate attempt to break the English line. You watch him ride across the valley, a man so covered in glory that songs have been written about his previous victories, his banner streaming behind him like a prayer made visible. An arrow takes his horse first, a bodkin point that punches through the animal's chest and drops it instantly. Geoffrey goes down hard, his armor ringing against the ground, but he struggles to his feet and continues forward on foot, his sword raised, shouting encouragement to his men. For a moment, you think he might actually reach the English line through sheer force of will. The second arrow takes him in the chest, punching through his breastplate at the joining with his arm guard. He staggers but doesn't fall, pulling the shaft free and throwing it aside with contempt. The third arrow hits him in the thigh, spinning him around. The fourth takes him in the back as he tries to retreat. And finally, Count Geoffrey de Montmorency, terror of tournaments and hero of a dozen battles, falls face first into the mud and doesn't get up. Sir Aldrich spurs his horse forward suddenly, and for a moment you think he means to charge the English line himself, to die with some semblance of honor rather than watch the systematic destruction of his entire world. Instead, he rides toward the fallen count, dismounting beside the body and kneeling in the bloody mud. You follow, your own horse stepping carefully around the bodies that litter the field. Geoffrey is still alive when you reach him, blood frothing from his mouth, his eyes already glazing. He recognizes Sir Aldrich and tries to speak, but the words are lost in the blood and mud. "Easy, my lord," Sir Aldrich says quietly, cradling the dying man's head. "Easy, it's over." Geoffrey's last words are barely audible. This isn't how it was supposed to end. Sir Aldrich closes the count's eyes and stands slowly, his own armor caked with mud and blood. Around you, the field stretches in all directions, covered with the bodies of knights whose names once inspired fear and respect across Europe. The flower of French chivalry lies broken and dying in a field they never should have entered, killed by peasants with farming tools turned deadly. "Come," Sir Aldrich says finally, "there's nothing more to see here." You walk your horses through the carnage, stepping carefully around bodies and abandoned weapons. A few French knights are still alive, calling weakly for help or simply lying still and waiting for death. The English archers move among them with workmanlike efficiency, cutting throats and claiming equipment. There's no mercy here, no chivalry, just the brutal arithmetic of victory and defeat. Near the edge of the field, you come across a young French knight, probably your own age, pinned beneath his dead horse. An arrow has punched through his thigh, and he's lost enough blood to ensure he won't be getting up again. His eyes are clear though, and when he sees you approaching, he manages a weak smile. English? He asks in accented English. Yes. Good fight, he says, then coughs up blood. Your archers, very good. You kneel beside him, offering water from your own flask. He drinks gratefully, then lies back against his dead horse's flank. My name is Philippe de Montclair, he says formally. I die well? You look at him. This boy who might have been your friend in other circumstances, who trained as you trained and dreamed as you dreamed, and nod. You die well. He smiles and closes his eyes. You stay with him until the end, which comes quietly a few minutes later. Then you stand and walk away, leaving another night's dreams buried in the mud of Crécy. That night, camped among the English baggage train, you sit beside a fire and stare into the flames. Sir Aldrich sits beside you, neither of you speaking, both trying to process what you've witnessed. The end of an age, the death of dreams, the brutal demonstration that technology and tactics matter more than honor and courage. 15 minutes, Sir Aldrich says finally. 15 minutes to destroy 3 centuries of French chivalry. You nod, thinking of Count Geoffrey's last words, of Philippe de Montclair's weak smile, of all the songs that will never be sung about knights who died in the mud because the world had moved on without telling them. What happens now, you ask? Sir Aldrich stares into the fire, his face aged beyond his years. Now we go home and pretend that what happened here doesn't change everything. We polish our armor and practice our charges and tell ourselves that this was an aberration, that real knights can still matter in real battles. He's quiet for a moment, then adds, but we know better now. We've seen the future, and it shoots 12 arrows a minute. The next morning, you help bury the dead. Hundreds of French knights, whose names were once spoken with reverence, now just meet to be covered with dirt. As you work, you realize that something fundamental has changed, not just in warfare but in the world itself. The age of the knight isn't over yet, but it's ending, and you've seen its death throes played out in a field in northern France. When you finally ride away from Crécy, you carry that knowledge with you like a wound that will never quite heal. Behind you, the crows feast on the corpses of heroes, and ahead lies a world where peasants with longbows can kill kings. And all your training means nothing against the mathematics of mass archery. This is the day knighthood begins to die, and you are among the last to see it die with honor. At 21, they give you your own men to command. Most are older than you, all are more experienced, and none expect to survive the winter. Welcome to leadership. It's your job to get them killed efficiently. The commission arrives on a gray November morning in 1350, delivered by a messenger whose mud-splattered surcoat tells the story of hard riding through worse weather. Sir Aldrich reads the parchment twice, his scarred face showing nothing, then hands it to you without comment. The words swim before your eyes at first. Too important, too impossible to process immediately, but gradually their meaning sinks in. You are to take command of a composite force of 30 men-at-arms and archers, tasked with holding the bridge at Pont Saint-Maxence against French attempts to cross the Oise River. It's a strategic position that controls one of the few reliable crossing points between English-held Calais and the contested territories further south. More importantly for the men who'll serve under you, it's also completely indefensible against any serious assault. Sir Aldrich finally breaks the silence, his voice carrying the weight of a man who sent too many young knights to their deaths. Congratulations, he says, though the word carries no joy. You're now responsible for more lives than your own. The reality of command hits you before you even meet your men. Suddenly, every decision carries consequences beyond personal survival. When you choose which road to take, which position to fortify, when to fight and when to withdraw, other people live or die based on your judgment. The sword at your side, once simply a tool for personal protection, now represents the power to send fathers and sons to their graves. Your new command assembles in the courtyard of a half-ruined monastery that serves as your staging area. They're a mixed group, drawn from different companies that have taken too many casualties to function independently. Most are veterans of the French campaigns, men whose faces carry the particular wariness of soldiers, who've survived long enough to know that survival is mostly luck, and that luck always runs out eventually. Sergeant Morris greets you with a nod that manages to convey both respect and reservation. He's 43 years old, which makes him ancient by medieval military standards. And he's been fighting French, Scots, Welsh, and Irish for more than 20 years. His left arm hangs slightly crooked where a mace broke it during the siege of Calais, and a scar runs from his left ear to the corner of his mouth where a French sword nearly ended his career permanently. "Sir," he says simply, his eyes taking your measure with the professional assessment of a man who's served under good commanders and bad ones, and learned to tell the difference quickly. "The lads are ready for your inspection." The lads range in age from 16 to 50, though the older ones look far older than their years. Young Peter Millwright, the youngest of your archers, still has the soft face of adolescence, but his eyes hold the hollow look of someone who's seen friends die badly. At the other extreme, old Hugh the crossbowman claims to remember fighting at Halidon Hill 20 years ago, though his memory isn't entirely reliable, and his hands shake when he thinks no one is watching. You walk the line slowly, trying to project confidence you don't feel, while studying the men whose lives now depend on your decisions. They're well armed for the most part, good mail, decent weapons, the kind of equipment that suggests they've taken their share of spoils from successful campaigns. But they're also tired in ways that sleep won't cure, marked by the kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting a war that seems to have no end. The bridge at Pont Saint-Maxence proves to be exactly as indefensible as you expected. It's a stone structure dating back to Roman times, solid enough to bear heavy traffic, but far too wide to block effectively with a small force. The approaches on both sides offer excellent positions for attackers, while providing minimal cover for defenders. Whoever chose this position for your stand either had no understanding of military engineering or a very dark sense of humor. Your orders are simple in their impossibility. Hold the bridge against all French attempts to cross while maintaining communication with the main English force 20 miles north. No reinforcements are available, no relief is scheduled, and no provision has been made for withdrawal if the position becomes untenable. You're expected to fight until everyone is dead or the French give up trying to cross, whichever comes first. Captain Black Hugh, your immediate superior, delivers these instructions with the casual indifference of a man who will be safely behind the main army's lines while you're dying for his tactical convenience. He's a political appointee, the kind of noble younger son who bought his commission with family connections rather than earning it with competence, and his understanding of military reality extends no further than the theoretical exercises he learned from books written by men who never held a sword in anger. The position is quite defensible, he informs you, while standing safely on the north side of the bridge, well away from French archery range. A determined force should be able to hold it indefinitely against anything but a major assault. You bite back the observation that everything is quite defensible when you're not the one defending it. Instead, you nod and ask about supplies, ammunition, and what constitutes a major assault that would justify withdrawal. Supplies will be sent as available, Black Hugh replies with the vague optimism of someone who's never had to stretch 2 days' rations into a week. As for withdrawal, those are not my orders to give. You'll hold until relieved or until the position is no longer strategically necessary. The translation is clear enough. You'll hold until you're all dead, and if anyone survives, they can expect court-martial for abandoning their post. It's the kind of order that sounds impressive in council meetings and looks good in dispatches, but takes no account of the human cost of carrying it out. Your first week at the bridge passes quietly, which only makes everyone more nervous. The French know you're there. Their scouts probe your position daily, testing your alertness and counting your strength, but they make no serious attempt to force a crossing. It's the calm before the storm, and everyone knows it. You use the time to improve your position as much as possible, setting up obstacles on the bridge approaches, positioning your archers to cover the likely attack routes, and drilling your men in the tactics you'll need if the French decide to force the issue. More importantly, you use the time to get to know the people whose lives you're responsible for. Sergeant Morris becomes your unofficial advisor, the man whose experience compensates for your inexperience. He's fought in situations like this before and survived through a combination of tactical cunning and ruthless pragmatism. His advice is invariably practical. Conserve arrows, keep weapons sharp, make sure everyone knows where the latrines are, and never trust orders that come from men who won't be sharing the danger. The trick to command, he tells you one evening, while you're both checking the sentries, is remembering that your job isn't to be brave. Your job is to be right. Brave gets people killed for no reason. Right gets them killed for good reasons, which is the best you can hope for in this business. Young Peter Millwright attaches himself to you with the desperate loyalty of a boy, looking for a father figure in a world that seems designed to kill young men. He's from Yorkshire, the son of a miller who sent him south to seek his fortune in the French wars. What he's found instead is mud, hunger, and the constant fear that comes with being the youngest and weakest member of a unit where survival depends on mutual support. You take him under your protection partly from sympathy and partly from recognition. He reminds you uncomfortably of yourself at that age, full of dreams and terrified of dying badly. Under your tutelage, he learns to move quietly, to shoot accurately under pressure, and to keep his nerve when French arrows start falling. Whether he'll live long enough to use these skills remains to be seen. Old Hugh provides a different kind of education through his endless stories of campaigns, sieges, and battles stretching back to the beginning of the current war. His memory may be unreliable and his drinking habits problematic, but his tactical knowledge is encyclopedic, and he has an uncanny ability to predict enemy movements based on terrain and weather conditions. Frenchies will come at dawn, he predicts on your 8th day at the bridge, studying the morning mist that rises from the river. Winds from the south, mist'll cover their approach, and they've been moving men into position all night. Herd the horses. You strain your ears but hear nothing except the normal sounds of morning, birds calling, water flowing, the distant lowing of cattle. But Hugh's ears have been tuned by 20 years of war, and when you quietly alert your men and move them to defensive positions, you're ready when the attack begins, just as the sun clears the eastern hills. The French assault starts with crossbow fire from concealed positions on the south bank. Bolts whistle overhead and clatter against the stone walls of your improvised fortifications. It's harassment fire, designed to keep your heads down while the main attack develops, but it serves its purpose. Your archers can't return effective fire against targets they can't see clearly. The real attack comes across the bridge itself, 40 French men-at-arms in mail and plate, moving in tight formation behind shields designed to deflect archery. They're professionals, well-equipped and disciplined, and they advance with the confident precision of soldiers who've done this successfully before. Your own men respond according to the drills you've practiced, but drill and reality prove to be different things. The carefully planned fields of fire become narrow lanes of chaos as men duck and weave to avoid crossbow bolts. The coordinated archery volleys become individual shots taken whenever someone can find a clear target. The tactical positions you've prepared become refuges where frightened men try to stay alive for one more minute. But somehow, it works. The French reach the center of the bridge before massed archery from your concealed positions begins to take its toll. Men fall, others retreat to drag wounded comrades to safety, and the disciplined advance becomes a fighting withdrawal. Within 20 minutes, the bridge is clear except for French bodies and the groans of men too badly wounded to retreat. You've won your first engagement as a commander, but the cost is higher than you expected. 2 of your archers are dead, killed by crossbow bolts that found gaps in their concealment. 4 others are wounded seriously enough to affect their fighting ability. Most importantly, you've expended nearly a quarter of your arrows, and there's no indication when or if resupply will arrive. Sergeant Morris finds you that evening, sitting beside the grave of one of your dead archers, a boy named William, whose parents will never know where or how he died. The sergeant's face shows the philosophical acceptance of a man who's attended too many funerals to be surprised by death anymore. "First command?" he asks, settling down beside you with the grunt of a man whose joints have absorbed too much punishment. "Yes. Feels different when it's your decision that gets them killed, doesn't it?" You nod, not trusting your voice. The tactical success of the day feels hollow when measured against the cost in human lives. William died because you positioned him in what you thought was a safe spot that turned out to be within range of French crossbows. The responsibility for that mistake sits heavily on your shoulders. "Gets easier," Morris continues, though his tone suggests he's not entirely convinced of this himself. "Not the dying, that's always hard, but the deciding. You learn to make choices fast and live with the consequences. You learn that perfect solutions don't exist and good enough usually isn't." The French try again 3 days later, this time with a night assault designed to catch your sentries off guard. They succeed partially. The attack gets closer to your positions before being detected, but your men respond well to the crisis. The fighting is confused and desperate, conducted largely by feel in the darkness, but again you hold the bridge. The cost continues to mount. Another archer dead, this time old Hugh, who took a French spear in the chest while defending a gap in your line. 3 more wounded, including Sergeant Morris, who suffered a sword cut across his ribs that will heal but will hurt for months. Your effective strength is now down to 24 men, and ammunition is running critically low. More importantly, morale is beginning to crack. The men understand the mathematics of attrition as well as you do. Every attack costs you men you can't replace, while the French can bring up reinforcements almost at will. Unless something changes dramatically, you'll all be dead within the week. The crisis comes on your 15th day at the bridge, when a messenger arrives with new orders from Captain Black Hugh. The main English force is withdrawing north to consolidate around Calais, and your position is no longer considered strategically necessary. However, rather than authorizing your withdrawal, the orders direct you to maintain your position for an additional 2 days to cover the army's retreat, after which you're to withdraw in good order if circumstances permit. The careful phrasing barely conceals the reality. You're being sacrificed to buy time for an army that no longer needs the bridge you're defending. Black Hugh has written you off as an acceptable loss, and his orders are crafted to give him legal cover for abandoning you, while maintaining the fiction that withdrawal remains possible. Sergeant Morris, his ribs bound with strips of linen that do little to ease his pain, reads the orders and shakes his head. "Bastards covering his arse," he says bluntly. 2 more days means we'll all be dead or captured, and he knows it. You stare at the parchment, trying to find some interpretation that doesn't involve the systematic murder of everyone under your command. The French have been building up their forces steadily, and intelligence suggests they're planning a major assault within the next day or 2. Trying to hold against a determined attack with your reduced numbers would be suicide, while attempting to withdraw in the face of superior enemy forces would likely result in the destruction of your entire command during the retreat. "What do you think?" you ask Morris, genuinely seeking advice from the only man in your command with enough experience to offer useful counsel. Morris is quiet for a long moment, considering options that all lead to the same conclusion. "I think," he says finally, "that if we're going to die anyway, we might as well die fighting for something that makes sense instead of dying for some lord's political convenience." The decision crystallizes in your mind with surprising clarity. Your duty is to your men first, your orders second, and the political calculations of distant commanders not at all. If you're going to ask these people to die, it should be for reasons they can understand and accept, not to buy 2 days for an army that's already abandoned them. That night, you call your men together and explain the situation honestly. The orders, the odds, the likely outcome of trying to obey them. You give them the choice. Follow orders and probably die for no good reason, or conduct a fighting withdrawal that at least offers the possibility of survival. The response is immediate and unanimous. Young Peter speaks for all of them. "We'll follow you, sir, wherever you lead." The withdrawal begins before dawn. conducted in stages that allow your archers to cover each movement while the French are still organizing their own assault. You're gambling that their attack preparations will slow their response to your movement, giving you precious hours to put distance between your force and their overwhelming numbers. The gamble succeeds, barely. By the time French patrols discover your abandonment of the bridge, you're 5 miles north and moving fast. They pursue, of course, but your men know the country better and move with the desperate speed of people who understand that capture means death. Captain Black Hugh's reaction to your unauthorized withdrawal is predictably furious. He threatens court-martial, dishonor, and execution for abandoning your post. But your men volunteer testimony about the impossible nature of your orders and the tactical impossibility of holding your position. More importantly, the successful withdrawal of 24 trained soldiers from certain death looks better in the dispatches than the heroic sacrifice of 30 men for no strategic gain. You escape formal punishment, but the incident marks you as a commander who puts his men's lives above blind obedience to orders. Some superiors see this as admirable pragmatism. Others view it as dangerous insubordination. Either way, you've learned something valuable about leadership. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to let good people die for bad reasons. 3 months later, you receive news that Captain Black Hugh died during a French raid on his headquarters, killed, according to witnesses, while trying to surrender. The irony is not lost on you. The man who was so ready to sacrifice others for strategic advantage discovered too late that wars are ultimately fought by individuals, and individuals have to live with the consequences of their commander's decisions. Sergeant Morris, his ribs finally healed enough for active duty, finds you reading the dispatch about Black Hugh's death. Feeling sorry for him? He asks. You consider the question seriously. Black Hugh was a poor commander and a worse human being, but he was also a product of a system that values political connections over competence and grand gestures over human lives. His death, while satisfying in a petty way, doesn't change the fundamental problems that created him. No, you say finally, but I'm not celebrating either. His death doesn't bring back the men who died following his orders. Morris nods. That's the difference between a good commander and a bad one. Good commanders remember the names. You've learned that true leadership isn't about following orders or winning battles. It's about being worthy of the trust that men like Peter and Morris and Old Hugh place in you when they agree to follow you into situations where they might die. That trust is earned through competence, honesty, and the willingness to share the risks you ask others to take. Standing on another bridge in another contested valley, preparing for another impossible mission, you realize that you finally learned what Sir Aldrich tried to teach you years ago. Your job isn't to be a hero. Your job is to bring people home. And sometimes that means choosing your battles carefully, even when the choice might cost you everything. Calais has been under siege for 11 months. The French are eating rats, you're eating horses, and everyone's eating the dead. This is what medieval warfare really looks like. Slow, hungry, and absolutely hopeless. The siege began in September of 1346, with all the pageantry and confidence that marked the beginning of great enterprises. King Edward's army surrounded the city with the methodical precision of men who expected a quick surrender, followed by a profitable occupation. The banners flew bright in the autumn sun. The siege engines were positioned with mathematical care, and the initial assaults proceeded according to the textbooks written by men who understood the theory of reducing fortified positions. That was 11 months ago. Now it's August of 1347. And the army that once looked like the instrument of inevitable victory resembles nothing so much as a collection of scarecrows held together by hunger, desperation, and the increasingly fragile belief that this suffering must eventually lead to something worthwhile. You're 22 years old, a veteran of 2 major battles and half a dozen smaller engagements, and you've learned that siege warfare is less about courage and tactics than it is about who can endure starvation longer. The city of Calais sits like a stone fortress rising from marshland, its walls thick enough to laugh at catapults and high enough to make scaling them a suicidal proposition. The harbor remains partially open to French supply ships, which means the defenders can bring in food and reinforcements while your own supply lines stretch across the channel and depend on weather, politics, and the continued cooperation of allies who are beginning to question the wisdom of this entire enterprise. Your position in the siege lines has given you an education in military engineering that you never wanted, and a perspective on human endurance that you wish you could forget. The trenches and earthworks that surround Calais have grown from temporary field fortifications into a permanent city of mud, wood, and despair. What began as a few weeks of aggressive investment has become a war of attrition where victory belongs to whoever can suffer longest without breaking. Sir Robert de Ashford occupies the position next to yours in the siege lines, and his gradual descent into madness provides a daily reminder of what this kind of warfare does to the human spirit. He's 31 years old, a veteran of the Scottish campaigns, who once carried himself with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to quick victories and decisive actions. The siege has worn him down to something that barely resembles the knight who rode south with such high hopes nearly a year ago. "They're watching us," Sir Robert whispers during the long night watches, his eyes fixed on the distant walls of Calais, where French sentries move like shadows against the torchlight. "Every night they count us. Every morning there are fewer." He's not wrong. Desertion has become epidemic among the English forces, with men slipping away in the darkness to begin the long walk home to families they may never see again. Others simply disappear into the marshland, whether from enemy action, accident, or suicide. No one knows or cares to investigate. The daily muster shows a steady hemorrhaging of strength that makes a mockery of the siege's strategic objectives. Master Engineer John provides a different perspective on the siege, approaching the reduction of Calais with the same methodical precision he once applied to building bridges and roads. He's 53 years old, which makes him practically ancient by medieval standards, and he supervised the construction of siege works from Scotland to Gascony. His cynicism is absolute and his competence beyond question, making him one of the few men in the entire army whose judgment you trust completely. This is not engineering, he tells you while inspecting the latest addition to your section of the siege works, a covered gallery designed to protect sappers attempting to undermine the city's walls. This is archaeology. We're slowly burying ourselves and calling it progress. John's assessment proves accurate. The gallery, which took 3 weeks and considerable loss of life to construct, advances exactly 12 feet before hitting bedrock that makes further tunneling impossible. The French defenders, meanwhile, have counter-tunneled successfully, collapsing 2 other English galleries and killing everyone inside them. The siege engines, bombarding the walls daily for months, have created impressive piles of rubble that the defenders simply incorporate into new fortifications. But it's the human cost of the siege that truly defines the experience. Your own men, reduced by disease and desertion from the 40 who began the siege to the 18 who remain, have become something harder and more desperate than soldiers. They're survivors of an ordeal that has no precedent in their experience and no apparent end in their future. Sergeant Morris, now your senior NCO and the closest thing you have to a reliable advisor, has developed a persistent cough that brings up blood and a 1,000-yard stare that suggests he's seeing things that aren't there. Young Peter, no longer young at 19, has grown gaunt and hollow-eyed, his boyish optimism replaced by the kind of grim endurance that comes from watching too many friends die badly. "We're becoming something else," Morris observes during one of your increasingly rare conversations about anything other than immediate survival. Not English, not soldiers, not really human anymore. Just things that used to be people. The daily routine of siege warfare has settled into a rhythm that would be comfortably predictable if it weren't so consistently lethal. Dawn brings the muster, where you count the night's losses and redistribute duties among the survivors. Morning is for maintenance, repairing walls, cleaning weapons, and dealing with the bodies that accumulate faster than you can bury them properly. Afternoon brings the bombardment, as your siege engines launch stones at walls that have grown thicker rather than weaker under the constant pounding. The French return fire with their own engines, supplemented by crossbow bolts and the occasional sortie designed to damage your works and kill your engineers. It's dangerous work that accomplishes nothing except providing the illusion of progress. Evening is for eating whatever can be found, which has become the siege's greatest challenge. The horses were butchered and consumed months ago, followed by the dogs, cats, and rats that once infested the camp. Foraging parties venture further each day to find anything edible, competing with French patrols and English deserters for resources that grow scarcer with each passing week. The food situation has become genuinely desperate. Your daily ration consists of bread made from sawdust and whatever grain can be stretched into something resembling nutrition, supplemented by a thin soup that contains more water than substance. Men fight over scraps that would have been thrown away as garbage during the early days of the siege. And the sick bay is filled with soldiers suffering from diseases caused by malnutrition. The psychological toll proves even worse than the physical deprivation. Months of constant danger, inadequate food, and no visible progress toward victory have created an atmosphere of despair that infects even the most dedicated soldiers. Men sit staring at nothing for hours, others laugh at inappropriate moments, and everyone has developed the kind of nervous tics that suggest minds beginning to fracture under pressure. Sir Robert's madness manifests in increasingly elaborate conversations with people who aren't there. He holds detailed discussions with his dead brother, debates strategy with imaginary French commanders, and issues orders to soldiers who exist only in his memory. Most disturbing, these conversations often make more sense than the orders coming from actual commanders. The dead know things, he confides to you during one of his lucid moments. They see the whole pattern, not just our little piece of it. My brother says this siege will end when the French run out of rats, but we'll run out of sanity first. The arrival of Marie de Calais changes everything, though you don't realize it immediately. She appears on the walls one morning during the daily exchange of insults and arrow shots between your forces and the French defenders. A young woman whose presence transforms the abstract concept of enemy civilians into something personal and immediate. She can't be more than 20, with dark hair that catches the morning light and a face that would be beautiful if it weren't marked by the same hunger and desperation that characterizes everyone connected to this siege. She appears irregularly, always in the same section of wall, sometimes alone, and sometimes with an older man who might be her father. You find yourself watching for her appearances, timing your own movements to coincide with her visits to the wall. It's a harmless obsession at first, just something to break the monotony of siege routine, but gradually it becomes something more significant. She represents everything human and normal that the siege has stripped away: youth, beauty, hope, the possibility that life contains something other than mud and death. The realization that you're falling in love with an enemy you've never spoken to strikes you as both ridiculous and inevitable. In a world stripped of everything that makes life worthwhile, the heart attaches itself to whatever offers even the illusion of meaning. Marie becomes your meaning, the focal point around which the chaos of siege warfare organizes itself into something bearable. Master Engineer John notices your preoccupation and offers his own perspective on the situation. She's pretty enough, he observes, while watching you scan the walls during the morning bombardment. Probably hungry enough, too. Wonder what she looks like when she's not starving. The comment strikes you as crude until you realize he's making a serious point about the artificial nature of your attachment. The woman you're fantasizing about is a product of extraordinary circumstances, and your feelings for her are shaped more by desperation than genuine emotion. In normal times, you might never have noticed her. In siege conditions, she becomes the embodiment of everything you're fighting to preserve. But understanding the psychological mechanics of your obsession doesn't diminish its power. If anything, the knowledge that your feelings are partly artificial makes them more precious, like a flower growing in a graveyard that's beautiful precisely because it shouldn't exist at all. The siege's climax begins in July, with news that King Philip of France is approaching with a relief army large enough to break the English investment and destroy Edward's forces in detail. The prospect of decisive action after months of static warfare should be welcome, but everyone understands that it probably means the end of everything you've endured and suffered to achieve. Preparations for the coming battle proceed with the mechanical efficiency of men who no longer expect to survive, but want to make their deaths count for something. Weapons are sharpened, armor is repaired, and final letters are written to families who may never receive them. The siege works that took months to construct are prepared for destruction to prevent their use by advancing French forces. Sir Robert's madness reaches its culmination during these final preparations. He spends entire days conducting elaborate military reviews of non-existent troops, planning defenses for positions that were abandoned months ago, and issuing tactical instructions that would have been brilliant if they bore any relationship to reality. His breakdown provides a grotesque mirror for the entire siege, once purposeful activity that has lost all connection to achievable objectives. "We're going to die here," Morris tells you, during what both of you suspect will be your final private conversation. Not gloriously, not meaningfully, just die, like animals in a trap. The French Relief Army arrives on August 1st, 30,000 men in good order with adequate supplies and clear tactical objectives. They establish positions that effectively surround the English siege lines, trapping Edward's forces between their army and the walls of Calais. For the first time in months, the tactical situation is perfectly clear. Surrender, break out, and probably die in the attempt, or wait for starvation to finish what the siege has begun. King Edward's response surprises everyone. Rather than attempting a desperate breakout or negotiating for terms, he offers to settle the matter through single combat between champions chosen by each side. It's a gesture from an earlier age of warfare, when personal honor mattered more than strategic advantage, and it represents either supreme confidence or complete desperation. The French, perhaps sensing that time favors them, reject the offer and settle in for their own siege of the English siege works. What follows is the strange spectacle of three armies: French defenders, English besiegers, and French relievers, all eating each other's supplies while waiting for someone else to starve first. The deadlock breaks when Calais finally surrenders on August 4th, not to English assault, but to starvation. 11 months of siege have reduced the civilian population to the point where continued resistance becomes physically impossible. The city's surrender should represent victory for the English forces, but everyone understands that it's really a mutual admission of defeat. King Edward's demand for the execution of the city's leaders creates the siege's final moral crisis. 6 of Calais' most prominent citizens are to be hanged as an example to other French cities, a decision that transforms what might have been seen as a legitimate military victory into something closer to murder. You're selected as one of the knights who will carry out the executions, an honor that feels more like a curse. Standing in the courtyard of a captured city, holding a sword that feels infinitely heavier than its actual weight, you must decide whether to follow orders that violate everything you were taught about chivalry and honor. Marie appears among the crowd of condemned civilians, her face showing the same resigned despair that has characterized everyone connected to this siege. Her presence transforms an abstract moral question into something personal and immediate. You're being asked to participate in the murder of the woman you've spent months dreaming about, the human anchor that helped you survive the psychological ordeal of siege warfare. The intervention comes from an unexpected source. Queen Philippa, moved by the condemned citizens' dignity in the face of death, successfully pleads for their lives. The executions are cancelled, the civilians are released, and Marie disappears into the crowd of refugees streaming out of the city. You never see her again, never learn her real name, never discover whether she noticed your daily vigil on the walls. Master Engineer John packs his siege engines with the professional satisfaction of a craftsman whose work has finally been completed. 11 months to capture one city, he observes, while supervising the loading of catapults onto wagons for transport to the next campaign. At this rate, we'll conquer France sometime around the Second Coming. Sir Robert stares at the walls of Calais with blank eyes that see nothing but empty stone. His madness has progressed beyond recovery, and he'll be shipped home to family members who won't recognize the broken thing that returns in place of the confident knight who left. His condition serves as a warning about the hidden costs of siege warfare, not just the obvious casualties, but the psychological wounds that may never heal. The march away from Calais should feel like victory, but it feels more like escape. You've accomplished your mission, captured a strategically important city, and struck a blow against French power that will resonate for years. but the cost has been measured in more than casualties and supplies. Something essential has been lost during those 11 months, some part of what made you human before the siege began. Your own men, the survivors of a force that once numbered 40, move with the mechanical precision of clockwork soldiers. They follow orders, perform their duties, and maintain their equipment, but they no longer laugh or sing or engage in the kind of casual camaraderie that marks healthy military units. They've been hollowed out by an experience that demanded more than anyone should be asked to give. The lessons of siege warfare prove more disturbing than the lessons of battle. In battle, you die quickly or you don't die at all. In siege warfare, you die slowly, piece by piece, until death becomes preferable to continued existence. It's a kind of warfare that strips away everything noble about military service and reduces it to the simple question of who can endure degradation longer. As you ride away from the walls of Calais, looking back at the city that cost so much to capture, you realize that victory and defeat are concepts that apply to kings and generals but not to the soldiers who do the actual fighting. For you and your men, siege warfare has been neither victory nor defeat, but simply survival of an ordeal that no one should have to endure. The captured city recedes behind you, another entry in the chronicles of English military achievement, another chapter in the long story of the war with France. But for the men who lived through those 11 months of hunger, desperation, and gradual dehumanization, Calais will always represent something different, proof that human beings can endure almost anything, and that endurance alone is neither victory nor virtue, but simply the stubborn refusal to admit that some experiences are too terrible to survive. The road ahead leads to new campaigns, new sieges, new opportunities to test the limits of human endurance against the machinery of medieval warfare. But nothing will ever be quite the same after Calais. You've learned what lies on the other side of glory, and that knowledge will color every subsequent campaign with the understanding that victory often costs more than defeat, and that survival sometimes demands the sacrifice of everything that makes survival worthwhile. The Black Death doesn't care about your armor, your sword, or your noble blood. It kills kings and peasants with equal enthusiasm. You're a knight in a world where your greatest enemy is invisible and your greatest weapon is distance. The plague arrives in England during the winter of 1348, carried in the holds of ships that dock at Portsmouth, with half their crews already dead. The first reports sound like the usual exaggerations that accompany any unusual event. Stories of entire cities abandoned, of bodies piled like cordwood in French streets, of a pestilence so virulent that it kills faster than graves can be dug. You dismiss them as the kind of wild tales that grow in the telling, products of fear and ignorance rather than observable fact. By spring, the reports have become undeniable reality. The plague spreads across England with the methodical efficiency of a military campaign, following roads and rivers, jumping from port to port, appearing simultaneously in locations hundreds of miles apart as if coordinated by some invisible general staff. The disease shows no respect for borders, social rank, or military prowess. It kills archbishops and beggars, knights and merchants, children and adults with the same pitiless consistency. You're 24 years old, a veteran of Crecy and Calais, a knight with your own small estate in Yorkshire and a growing reputation as a competent military commander. The skills that have kept you alive through siege and battle prove useless against an enemy that can't be fought with sword or lance. For the first time since childhood, you face a threat that makes your military experience irrelevant and your armor nothing more than expensive decoration. The disease reaches your domain in late April, brought by a merchant returning from London with news of the wool trade and a fever that kills him 3 days after his arrival. Within a week, 5 more people in your village show symptoms, the characteristic swellings in neck and groin, the black patches on skin that give the plague its name, the delirium that precedes death by hours or days depending on the victim's constitution. Your first instinct is to treat the plague like any other military threat. Gather information, assess the situation, and develop a strategy for defense. But plague defies every principle of medieval warfare. There are no battle lines to establish, no enemy positions to assault, no terrain advantages to exploit. The disease strikes without warning. advances without logic, and kills without regard for courage, skill, or tactical preparation. Brother Francis, your domain's priest, initially approaches the plague as a theological rather than medical problem. He's an earnest young man who took his vows from genuine religious conviction rather than family pressure, and his faith in divine protection proves both touching and ultimately tragic. He insists on administering last rites to every plague victim, comforting the dying, and maintaining the normal routines of religious observance, even as the evidence mounts that prayer offers no protection against the pestilence. God is testing us, he explains during one of your increasingly frequent discussions about the crisis. Our faith, our charity, our willingness to care for the suffering, regardless of personal cost. This is not punishment, but purification. His theological certainty contrasts sharply with the practical challenges facing your household. Food supplies are disrupted as farmers die or flee. Trade ceases as merchants avoid infected areas. The normal mechanisms of feudal administration break down as bailiffs, stewards, and tax collectors succumb to the disease or simply disappear into the countryside, hoping to find safety in isolation. Lord Edmund, your elderly liege lord and the man who knighted you after Crecy, represents the old guard's response to the unprecedented crisis. He's 67 years old, which makes him almost immortal by medieval standards, and he's survived wars, famines, and political upheavals that would have broken younger men. His approach to the plague combines stoic acceptance with practical measures that reveal a lifetime of experience managing crises. This is not the first pestilence to visit England, he tells you during what proves to be your final meeting. The chronicles record others, perhaps not as severe, but severe enough. The kingdom survived them, and it will survive this one. Our duty is to maintain what order we can until the crisis passes. But even Lord Edmund's experience proves inadequate against the plague's unprecedented scope and virulence. He contracts the disease in early May and dies within 4 days, his death as swift and undignified as any peasant's. His passing removes one of the few stable authorities in your region and leaves you effectively independent in a world where independence often means isolation, and isolation usually means death. The human cost becomes personal when members of your own household begin falling ill. Your cook, a cheerful woman named Martha who's managed your kitchen for 3 years, develops fever and swellings that mark her as another plague victim. Your stable master, the man who taught you to judge horseflesh and manage your small herd of war horses, dies in agony despite every remedy your household can provide. Most devastating is the illness that strikes young William, your squire and the closest thing you have to family. He's 17 years old, the son of a minor knight who died at Calais, and you've spent 2 years training him in the skills that define knighthood. His fever begins on a Tuesday morning and progresses with terrifying speed through the familiar stages of plague: swelling, delirium, the characteristic blackening of extremities that signals impending death. You sit beside his bed during what everyone knows will be his final night, watching the boy who once helped you into armor struggle for each breath. Medieval medicine offers no effective treatment for plague beyond prayer and palliative care, but you try everything anyway. Herbal remedies suggested by local wise women, bloodletting recommended by a traveling physician, even the folk charms that desperate people turn to when conventional wisdom proves useless. William dies just before dawn, his last words a confused question about whether his armor is properly maintained for tomorrow's training session. You close his eyes and sit with his body until Brother Francis arrives to perform the final rites, though the priest's own appearance suggests he won't be far behind his flock in death. The collapse of normal social order accelerates as the plague tightens its grip on your region. Survivors abandon their homes and responsibilities, fleeing toward destinations that exist more in hope than reality. Fields go unplanted, animals wander untended, and the basic infrastructure of rural life begins to disintegrate. Your own authority, derived from feudal bonds that assume stable populations and ongoing relationships, becomes meaningless when there's no one left to command or protect. Margot, a peasant woman whose family has worked your land for generations, brings you a different perspective on the crisis. She's lost her husband and 2 of her 3 children to the plague. but she continues caring for survivors with a practical determination that shames your own theoretical approach to leadership. Her youngest child, a daughter of perhaps 6 years old, represents the future of your domain if anyone survives to see that future. Will you save her? Margot asks during a conversation that takes place beside yet another fresh grave. Not with sword or armor, but with whatever it takes? The question forces you to confront the limitations of everything you've learned about duty and protection. Your military training taught you to defend people through violence, but plague can't be fought with weapons. Your noble education emphasized honor and ceremony, but honor means nothing to disease, and ceremony offers no protection against death. For the first time in your adult life, you're being asked to protect someone using skills you don't possess against an enemy you can't understand. Your response reveals something about character that war never quite tested. Instead of fleeing like so many others, you choose to stay and do whatever you can with whatever resources remain. It's not heroic in any conventional sense. There are no battles to win, no glorious charges to make, no songs that will commemorate your actions. There's only the grinding daily work of keeping people alive in a world that seems designed to kill them. The practical measures you implement reflect a combination of common sense and desperate improvisation. You establish isolation protocols that keep healthy and sick people separated, though your understanding of disease transmission is primitive at best. You organize the distribution of food and supplies among survivors, using your authority to prevent the hoarding and violence that might otherwise destroy what little community remains. Most importantly, you maintain a visible presence that provides psychological stability for people whose world has collapsed around them. Your daily rounds through the village, your personal involvement in caring for the sick, your willingness to share the risks that everyone faces, these actions matter more than any military victory you've achieved. Brother Francis dies in June, succumbing to the same plague he's been fighting with prayer and sacrament for months. His death removes the last official representative of higher authority in your domain, leaving you as the sole remaining link between survivors and anything resembling organized governance. The responsibility weighs heavily, not because of its importance, but because of your growing recognition that importance means nothing when measured against mortality. The priest's final words prove prophetic. God doesn't want martyrs from this trial. He wants survivors. Do whatever it takes to keep them alive. The summer brings a gradual decline in new cases, though whether this represents the natural course of the disease or simply the exhaustion of available victims remains unclear. Your domain, which once supported nearly 200 people, now houses fewer than 50 survivors. The empty houses and abandoned fields bear witness to a catastrophe that makes military defeat seem trivial by comparison. Margot's daughter survives, one of the few children to live through the plague in your domain. Her survival feels like a small victory against overwhelming loss, though the joy is tempered by the knowledge that she'll grow up in a world fundamentally different from the one her parents knew. The stable social order that defined medieval life has been shattered, and what emerges from the wreckage remains to be seen. The economic implications of the plague prove as revolutionary as its immediate human cost. With so few workers remaining, the survivors can demand wages and conditions that would have been unthinkable before the pestilence. The rigid social hierarchy that placed everyone in fixed positions from birth to death begins to crack under the pressure of practical necessity. Peasants who once accepted their station without question now negotiate terms with lords who need their labor more than they need their deference. Your own position changes fundamentally as well. The feudal bonds that once defined your relationship with superiors and subordinates have been severed by death, leaving you effectively independent but also isolated. The king's authority still exists in theory, but the practical mechanisms for exercising that authority have been disrupted by the massive loss of life among the administrative class. The plague's end, when it finally comes, feels less like victory than exhaustion. The disease doesn't retreat, it simply runs out of victims. By autumn, new cases have become rare enough to seem aberrant rather than inevitable. The survivors emerge from months of crisis, changed in ways that will take years to fully understand. You've learned lessons about leadership that no military campaign could have taught. Command in wartime involves directing people towards specific objectives using established methods and clear chains of authority. Command during plague involves improvising solutions to unprecedented problems while maintaining morale among people who have every reason to despair. The skills don't transfer directly, but the underlying qualities, judgment, persistence, willingness to accept responsibility, prove applicable to challenges that bear no resemblance to battlefield command. The physical changes to your domain tell only part of the story. Empty houses can be rebuilt, abandoned fields can be replanted, and the infrastructure of rural life can be restored given time and labor. The psychological changes prove more profound and permanent. The people who survived the plague are different from those who lived before it. Harder, more pragmatic, less willing to accept traditional explanations for events that defy traditional understanding. Brother Francis's replacement, when he finally arrives from York, finds a community that has learned to survive without extensive ecclesiastical guidance. The new priest's authority rests on practical usefulness rather than theological certainty, and his sermons focus more on rebuilding community than on abstract spiritual questions. The plague has created a more pragmatic form of Christianity, one that emphasizes survival over salvation and community cooperation over individual piety. Your own faith, such as it was, has been tested and found wanting in some respects while being strengthened in others. You no longer believe in a God who intervenes directly in human affairs to protect the righteous and punish the wicked, but you've developed a deeper appreciation for the human capacity to endure suffering and maintain dignity in circumstances that would justify complete despair. The autumn harvest, gathered by survivors working abandoned fields, provides enough food to sustain the community through winter. It's a small victory that feels enormous given the scale of recent losses. For the first time in months, people begin talking about the future rather than simply trying to survive the present. As winter approaches, you find yourself planning not just for immediate survival, but for the longer-term reconstruction of your domain. The process will take years and will result in something fundamentally different from what existed before the plague. The survivors will build new communities based on experience rather than tradition, practical necessity rather than inherited custom. You're 35 years old now, aged beyond your years by experiences that no training could have prepared you for. The knight who rode to war with such confidence has been replaced by someone who understands that the greatest battles are often fought against enemies that can't be defeated by courage or skill. You've learned that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to endure, and that the most important victories are often the ones that nobody sees or celebrates. The plague is over, at least for now, but its effects will reshape English society for generations. You've survived not because of your martial skills or noble blood, but because you chose to stay and help when fleeing would have been easier. It's not the kind of heroism that bards sing about, but it's the kind that matters when the world ends quietly, one person at a time. Standing in your hall on a cold November evening, looking at the handful of survivors who represent the future of your domain, you realize that you've participated in something larger than any military campaign. You've helped humanity endure its darkest hour, and in doing so, you've discovered reserves of strength you never knew you possessed. The plague took everything that seemed permanent and important, but it couldn't take the fundamental human capacity to care for each other when caring seems pointless and hope appears impossible. Tomorrow will bring new challenges as England slowly begins the process of recovery and reconstruction. But tonight, sitting beside a fire that warms survivors rather than warriors, you allow yourself the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when everything collapsed, you chose to build rather than flee. It's enough. You're 40 years old, and your body is a museum of pain. Every scar tells a story you'd rather forget. Your sword arm shakes, your back aches, and young knights look at you like you're already dead. Welcome to middle age and medieval times. The morning routine that once took minutes now requires careful planning and considerable willpower. Rising from bed involves a complex negotiation between joints that have stiffened overnight and muscles that protest any sudden movement. The left shoulder, dislocated during a skirmish near Poitiers and never properly healed, clicks audibly when you raise your arm. The right knee, twisted beneath a falling horse at Crécy, refuses to bend properly until you've walked on it for at least an hour. Your reflection in the polished metal that serves as a mirror shows a face that bears little resemblance to the eager young squire who first picked up a sword. Gray threads run through hair that was once dark brown, and lines around your eyes speak of too many years spent squinting into sun and weather. A scar across your left cheek, courtesy of a French crossbow bolt that came too close, gives your face a perpetually grim expression that matches your increasingly dark view of the world. Sir James de Whitmore represents everything you once were and everything you'll never be again. He's 23 years old, recently knighted after distinguished service in the latest campaign against the Scots, and possessed of the kind of boundless confidence that comes from never having failed at anything important. His armor gleams with newness, his weapons show no signs of hard use, and his eyes hold the bright enthusiasm of someone who still believes that war is glorious and honor is real. "Sir," he says during your first formal meeting, his voice carrying the respect due to a senior knight, but also a subtle undertone that suggests he's humoring an old man's pretensions. "I've heard stories of your service at Crécy and Calais. It must have been different then." The careful phrasing barely conceals what he really means, that your campaigns belong to a bygone era, that your experience is ancient history, that the world has moved on and left you behind. He's not deliberately cruel. He simply can't imagine that the broken-down knight standing before him was once as young and confident as he is now. Lady Catherine, your wife of 8 years, manages your household with the efficient competence that makes your estate function, despite your increasingly frequent absences and declining health. She's 34 years old, the daughter of a minor baron who married you for practical reasons that had little to do with romance. Over the years, mutual respect has grown into something resembling affection, though neither of you pretends that your union represents the passionate love celebrated in courtly poetry. "You're limping again," she observes during breakfast, her tone carrying the matter-of-fact concern of someone who's watched your physical decline with professional interest. "Dr. Reynolds thinks you should consider reducing your military obligations." Dr. Reynolds is a university-trained physician whose modern ideas about medicine conflict sharply with the traditional remedies favored by local wise women. He's examined your collection of old wounds with academic fascination, cataloging injuries that represent a comprehensive survey of medieval battlefield trauma. His recommendation that you retire from active military service is medically sound and strategically impossible. "The king has called for levies," you explain, though the conversation feels like one you've had too many times before. "Lord Pemberton expects our contribution to the Scottish campaign. I can't send men I won't lead personally." It's the old argument about duty and honor, complicated by the practical reality that your body may no longer be capable of fulfilling obligations that your position demands. The feudal system assumes that knights remain effective warriors throughout their adult lives, but it makes no provision for the inevitable physical decline that makes this assumption false. Old Sergeant Morris, now your senior man-at-arms and the closest thing you have to a contemporary, provides daily reminders of what extended military service does to the human body. He's 45 years old, which makes him practically ancient by military standards, and every movement causes him visible pain. His right arm, broken during the siege of Calais and improperly set, hangs at an angle that makes wielding weapons difficult. His left leg, pierced by a Scottish spear 3 years ago, never healed properly and forces him to walk with a pronounced limp. "We're a sorry pair," he observes while watching young Sir James demonstrate sword techniques to a group of impressed squires. "Old men pretending we can still do what young men do better." The observation stings because it's accurate. The skills that once defined your identity as a knight, the ability to fight effectively in armor, to control a war horse in battle, to endure the physical demands of campaign life, have eroded gradually but inexorably. Age has accomplished what French swords never managed. It has defeated you without the courtesy of a clean death. The summons for the Scottish campaign arrives in March, delivered by a messenger whose youth and enthusiasm remind you uncomfortably of your own early career. King Edward requires a force of 20 men-at-arms for service against the Scots, who have been raiding English border settlements with increasing frequency. Your feudal obligations make compliance mandatory, but your physical condition makes leadership questionable. Lady Catherine's opposition to your participation in the campaign proves more formidable than any enemy you faced in battle. She marshals arguments with the tactical precision of an experienced general, pointing out that your health problems make you a liability to your own men, that your estate needs management that only you can provide, and that your death in some minor border skirmish would accomplish nothing except leaving her a widow with limited resources. Pride, she says during one of your more heated discussions, is a luxury that men your age can't afford. You have responsibilities here that matter more than proving you can still swing a sword. But pride isn't the only issue. Your position as a knight depends on your ability to fulfill military obligations, and failure to answer the king's summons could result in the forfeiture of lands that represent your family's entire future. The feudal system is unforgiving of weakness, whether caused by cowardice or simple physical inability. The compromise you reach with your conscience proves as unsatisfactory as most compromises. You'll lead the expedition personally, but delegate actual combat responsibilities to Sir James, whose youth and vigor make him better suited to the physical demands of border warfare. It's a solution that preserves the forms of honor while acknowledging the substance of decline. A march north to the Scottish border takes 2 weeks and leaves you exhausted in ways that have little to do with distance traveled. The daily routine of breaking camp, riding in armor, and setting up new positions each evening drains your energy more completely than you expected. By the time you reach the staging area near Berwick, you're moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose body has reached its limits. The young men under your command watch your struggles with a mixture of sympathy and concern that proves more demoralizing than open contempt would have been. They help you into armor without being asked, assist with mounting your horse when they think no one is watching, and generally treat you with the gentle consideration normally reserved for elderly relatives who can no longer care for themselves. Sir James handles most of the practical aspects of command with tactful efficiency, issuing orders that you approve but lack the energy to deliver personally. His competence should be reassuring, but instead it highlights your own declining relevance. You've become a figurehead, necessary for legal and traditional reasons, but irrelevant to the actual work of military leadership. The border skirmish that defines the campaign occurs on a gray April morning, when Scottish raiders attempt to steal cattle from an English farm protected by your force. It's exactly the kind of minor engagement that has defined Anglo-Scottish warfare for generations. A few dozen men fighting over livestock that's worth more than most of them will earn in a year. The action begins before dawn, when Scottish voices outside your camp indicate that the enemy has achieved tactical surprise. Your men respond quickly enough, but the confusion of darkness and the necessity of fighting in hastily donned armor create exactly the kind of chaotic situation where experience matters more than youth. You attempt to participate in the fighting, drawing your sword and moving toward the sound of combat with the automatic responses developed over 20 years of military service. But your body betrays you in ways that shock you with their suddenness and completeness. Your legs, weakened by old wounds and stiffened by cold, fail to support your weight properly. You stumble, catch yourself, stumble again, and finally fall heavily to the muddy ground. The fall itself isn't particularly dramatic. No enemy strikes you down. No heroic charge goes wrong. You simply lose your balance and discover that your 40-year-old body can't recover from mistakes that a 20-year-old would barely notice. Lying in the mud while battle rages around you, you experience the definitive moment when age defeats pride and reality overwhelms self-image. Sir James visits regularly to report on his management of your military obligations, and to seek advice on situations where his inexperience creates uncertainty. These conversations gradually evolve into a mentoring relationship that proves mutually beneficial. He gains access to hard-won wisdom about leadership and warfare, while you maintain involvement in military affairs without the physical demands that your body can no longer meet. The winter months bring time for reflection on a career that's now essentially complete. Sitting beside the fire in your hall, you inventory the experiences that have shaped your adult life. The terror and exhilaration of your first battle, the grinding misery of siege warfare, the moral compromises required by command, the gradual erosion of idealism that military service inevitably produces. You've survived longer than most men of your generation and achieved more than you had any right to expect when you first picked up a wooden sword as a 7-year-old page. Your lands are secure, your family is provided for, and your reputation among your peers remains intact despite the circumstances of your retirement. By any reasonable measure, your life has been successful. But success feels different when viewed from the perspective of decline rather than ascent. The achievements that once seemed so important now appear as entries in a ledger that someone else will eventually inherit. Your victories in battle, your skill at arms, your reputation for courage, all of these accomplishments will fade from memory within a generation unless someone takes the trouble to record them. The realization that mortality applies even to knights who survive their wars comes with surprising force. You've always known intellectually that life is finite, but experiencing the gradual failure of capabilities that once seemed permanent drives the lesson home with uncomfortable clarity. The body that carried you through so many dangers is betraying you in ways that no enemy ever managed, and there's no strategy for defeating an opponent that lives inside your own skin. Still, there's satisfaction in having played your role well enough to earn a peaceful retirement. You've served your king faithfully, protected your dependents effectively, and maintained your honor through circumstances that tested every principle you were taught to value. The fact that age has forced you to step aside doesn't diminish what you accomplished while you were capable of accomplishment. Looking back from the perspective of middle age, you understand that the real victory was never about defeating enemies or winning battles. It was about becoming the kind of person who could be trusted with responsibility for other people's lives and futures. The test wasn't whether you could fight well, but whether you could live well, with courage when courage was needed, with prudence when rashness would have been easier, and with humility when pride would have been more satisfying. Tomorrow will bring new challenges as you learn to find purpose in a life that no longer revolves around military service. But tonight, sitting in your own hall beside a fire that warms family rather than soldiers, you allow yourself the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, when everything was at stake, you proved worthy of the trust placed in you. It's enough. You're 60 years old, and they're calling you the last knight, not because you're the final one to live, but because you're the final one who remembers what it meant. The world has moved on, and you're a relic in your own lifetime. The morning of your 60th birthday dawns gray and cold, matching your mood as you contemplate a milestone that most men of your generation never lived to see. Your body has become a catalog of accumulated damage, joints that protest every movement, scars that ache before storms, and a persistent tremor in your sword hand that serves as a daily reminder of battles fought long ago. The face that stares back from your polished metal mirror belongs to a stranger, etched with lines that map decades of worry, pain, and gradual disillusionment with a world that no longer values what you spent your life learning. Grandson William finds you in the solar that morning, studying a letter from the king that summons knights to another campaign against the French. At 16, he possesses the lean build and quick intelligence that would have marked him as ideal knightly material in your youth, but his interests lie elsewhere. Instead of sword work and horsemanship, he spends his time with account books and trade negotiations, preparing for a career in commerce that would horrify your father, but represents the practical future of your family's fortunes. "Grandfather," he says, settling into the chair across from you with the easy familiarity of someone who's never learned to be intimidated by authority. "Master Geoffrey says you've been summoned to serve with the king's army. Surely you're not planning to accept." The question carries no disrespect, only the practical concern of a young man who's learned to think in terms of profit and loss rather than honor and duty. William represents a new generation that views warfare as a business proposition rather than a sacred calling, measuring military service against its costs in money and opportunity rather than its rewards in glory and reputation. "The summons is addressed to the lord of this manor," you explain, though the justification sounds hollow even to your own ears. Feudal law doesn't recognize age as an excuse for avoiding military obligations. William's expression suggests he finds this explanation less than convincing. Master Geoffrey also says the cannon can breach any castle wall and that professional soldiers with firearms are replacing knights on battlefields. What's the point of answering a summons to fight a war that's already moved beyond everything you know? The boy's pragmatism stings because it's accurate. The military world that shaped your understanding of warfare and honor has been evolving rapidly during the later years of your life, driven by technological innovations that make traditional knightly combat increasingly irrelevant. Cannon can indeed breach castle walls that once seemed impregnable, and disciplined infantry armed with longbows or early firearms can slaughter heavy cavalry with systematic efficiency. Master Geoffrey, the artillery specialist who's been consulting with various lords about modernizing their defenses, represents the new breed of military expert whose knowledge comes from mathematics and engineering rather than personal combat experience. He's a university-trained man in his 30s whose understanding of siege warfare comes from books and theoretical models rather than the hard-won experience of actually conducting or enduring sieges. "Your grandfather fought at Crécy," Master Geoffrey explains to William during one of their frequent discussions about military modernization, his tone carrying the respectful distance of someone addressing a museum piece. "That was 40 years ago, when knights still mattered on battlefields. The world has changed considerably since then." The careful phrasing conceals what he really means, that your knowledge is obsolete, your experience irrelevant, and your continued existence an interesting historical curiosity, rather than a source of practical wisdom. He's not deliberately insulting. He simply can't imagine that someone whose military education predates gunpowder might have anything useful to contribute to modern warfare. Young scholar Marcus provides a different perspective on your situation through his systematic attempts to record the oral history of your generation before it disappears entirely. He's a clerically trained young man whose mission involves collecting first-hand accounts of significant events from participants who actually witnessed them. His questions probe details that seemed unimportant at the time, but have gained historical significance with the passage of years. "Tell me about the charge at Crécy," he requests during one of your regular interviews, his pen poised over parchment that will preserve your memories long after your body has returned to dust. "What did it feel like to watch the end of an era?" The question assumes a perspective you didn't possess at the time. During the battle itself, you were focused on immediate survival rather than historical significance. Only in retrospect does the engagement appear as a decisive moment when medieval warfare began its transformation into something unrecognizable. At the time, it felt like chaos, terror, and the systematic slaughter of everything you'd been taught to revere. "I didn't know it was the end of anything," you tell him honestly. "I thought it was an aberration, a single battle, where unusual circumstances produced an unusual outcome. I expected the next engagement to return warfare to normal patterns." Marcus nods and makes notes with the careful precision of someone who understands that memory is fragile and that first-hand accounts disappear forever when their sources die. His documentation serves as insurance against the complete loss of your generation's experience, preserving details that might otherwise vanish into the general historical narrative. The contrast between your grandson's practical modernity and your own traditional worldview becomes particularly stark when William announces his intention to marry the daughter of a wealthy merchant rather than seeking a noble bride whose connections might enhance the family's political position. His choice represents a fundamental shift in priorities that reflects the changing nature of power and influence in a world where money increasingly matters more than lineage. She brings a dowry of £200 and connections to the Flemish wool trade, William explains, presenting his decision in terms that emphasize practical advantage over romantic sentiment. Her father owns 3 ships and warehouses in both London and Bruges. The marriage will secure our family's commercial future. Your instinctive reaction focuses on the social implications of marrying beneath his station. But you recognize that such concerns belong to a world that no longer exists. Noble birth matters less than it once did, and commercial success provides security that land ownership alone cannot guarantee. William's pragmatic approach to marriage reflects the same practical intelligence that guides his career choices. Lady Catherine, now in her 50s and possessed of the kind of settled wisdom that comes from managing a household through decades of change, serves as translator between your traditional perspectives and William's modern sensibilities. Her own marriage to you was arranged for practical reasons that had little to do with romance, but the partnership that developed over time has proved more durable than many unions based on initial passion. He's right about the future, she tells you during one of your private discussions about William's choices. The old ways of achieving security and status are disappearing. Adapting to change is more important than maintaining traditions that no longer serve their original purposes. Her observation reflects hard-won experience, managing an estate whose prosperity depends increasingly on commercial relationships rather than feudal obligations. The tenants who once owed you military service now pay rent in money that can be invested in trade ventures. The political connections that once provided security now matter less than economic partnerships with merchants and craftsmen. The arrival of new military technology makes your obsolescence visible in ways that hurt more than philosophical discussions about social change. When a demonstration of cannon effectiveness reduces a section of castle wall to rubble in minutes, you're forced to confront the reality that fortifications you've spent your life defending and attacking can be overcome by professional gunners who've never held a sword. Master Geoffrey conducts the demonstration with scientific precision, measuring powder charges and calculating trajectories with mathematical tools that transform warfare from an art requiring years of experience into a technical discipline that can be learned from manuals. The systematic destruction of masonry that once seemed permanent provides a visceral reminder that everything you've understood about military engineering has become irrelevant. Castle walls are now obstacles to be removed rather than barriers to be respected, he explains while examining the rubble created by his cannon. The entire concept of siege warfare will need to be reconsidered in light of artillery capabilities. Standing in the wreckage of stone that has protected your family for generations, you realize that your military knowledge has become as obsolete as the fortifications it was designed to defend. The skills that defined your identity as a knight, mounted combat, castle assault, and defense, the complex rituals of siege warfare, have been rendered meaningless by technological advances that occurred during your own lifetime. The final crisis of your military career arrives when William flatly refuses to consider entering knightly service, choosing instead to complete his education with merchants in London who can teach him the commercial skills necessary for success in the modern world. His rejection of everything you've devoted your life to mastering feels like a personal repudiation, though you understand intellectually that his choice reflects wisdom rather than disrespect. I won't spend my life learning skills that won't matter in 10 years, he explains with the blunt honesty of youth, his words cutting through the emotional attachments that make it difficult for you to see clearly. Knighthood belongs to the past. Trade and commerce represent the future. The conversation that determines your family's future takes place in your hall on a winter evening when the fire provides the only warmth against drafts that penetrate walls designed for defense rather than comfort. William sits across from you with the patient determination of someone who's made a difficult decision and won't be deterred by emotional appeals or traditional obligations. You could force me to accept knighthood, he acknowledges, recognizing the legal authority that still allows you to determine his career path. But forcing someone to embrace a dying profession doesn't serve anyone's interests. His words strike you with unexpected force because they articulate what you've been trying to avoid acknowledging. Knighthood isn't simply changing, it's dying, slowly and inexorably, replaced by professional soldiers whose effectiveness depends on technology and training rather than individual valor and inherited status. Your grandson's refusal to enter a doomed profession represents intelligent adaptation rather than moral failure. The moment of decision arrives with surprising clarity. Looking at William's determined face across the firelight, you see not defiance, but practical wisdom. His rejection of knighthood represents the same kind of strategic thinking that kept you alive through decades of warfare, applied to a different kind of survival challenge in a world that no longer rewards traditional martial virtues. You raise your hand, intending to strike him for dishonoring family traditions that stretch back generations. But as your arm reaches its apex, you stop, seeing in his young features the same intelligent determination that carried you through your own challenges when the world seemed determined to kill you. Slowly, you lower your hand and nod. "Perhaps you're right, boy," you say, the words carrying more weight than you expected. "Perhaps it's time for better ways." The acceptance doesn't come easily or completely. Part of you will always believe that knighthood represents something valuable that shouldn't be abandoned simply because it's become impractical. But another part recognizes that survival requires adaptation, and that clinging to obsolete methods is a form of suicide that serves no one's interests. William's visible relief suggests that he expected more resistance to his decision. "Thank you, grandfather. I know this isn't what you wanted for me." "What I wanted," you reply after considering his words carefully, "was for you to have the chance to choose your own path rather than having it chosen by circumstances beyond your control. You've made an intelligent choice based on realistic assessment of opportunities and obstacles. That's what I tried to teach myself to do." The conversation marks the end of your family's military tradition, but it also represents the beginning of something new and potentially more durable. William's commercial career will provide security that doesn't depend on royal favor or military success, and his children will inherit opportunities that your martial achievements could never have created. Young scholar Marcus finishes recording your life story as summer turns to autumn. His completed manuscript representing the distillation of experiences that span the entire transition from medieval to early modern warfare. His final question proves unexpectedly difficult to answer, cutting through accumulated details to address the fundamental meaning of everything you've witnessed and endured. "What was it all for?" he asks, setting down his pen and looking at you with genuine curiosity. "The battles, the training, the years of service, what did it accomplish?" The question forces you to consider your life from a perspective that emphasizes results rather than intentions, measuring achievement against objective standards rather than subjective satisfaction. The knights you fought beside are mostly dead, the enemies you defeated are mostly forgotten, and the causes you served have been superseded by new political arrangements that make your struggles seem quaint and irrelevant. But sitting in your hall on a peaceful evening, surrounded by evidence of prosperity and stability that your efforts helped create and preserve, you find an answer that satisfies both practical and emotional requirements. You look around at the comfortable room, the well-fed servants, the secure walls that still protect your family, even if they can no longer withstand cannon fire. "This," you say simply, gesturing toward the evidence of peace and prosperity that surrounds you. "All of this." The scholar nods, understanding that your answer encompasses more than physical structures. The security that allows William to choose commerce over combat. The stability that permits young scholars to collect historical narratives. The prosperity that makes possible investments in new technologies and methods. All of these benefits rest on foundations that your generation's sacrifices helped establish. Your grandson approaches as Marcus packs his materials for departure, carrying account books that represent his own contribution to the family's continued prosperity. His marriage negotiations have progressed successfully, his commercial contacts are expanding, and his future appears bright in ways that don't depend on martial achievements or royal recognition, Master Jeffrey says cannon are making castle walls obsolete, William reports, sharing information that once would have seemed like military intelligence, but now feels like economic analysis. But he also says that fortifications will adapt to artillery rather than simply disappearing. New designs, new materials, new approaches to defense. His observation suggests that change doesn't necessarily mean extinction, that adaptation might preserve essential functions even when traditional methods become impractical. Perhaps knighthood will evolve rather than die, finding new forms of expression that serve contemporary needs while maintaining connections to historical precedents. The autumn harvest provides your final opportunity to exercise leadership that bridges old and new approaches to authority and responsibility. Organizing the collection and storage of grain requires logistical skills that transfer directly from military to civilian applications, while the commercial negotiations that determine prices and markets demand exactly the kind of practical intelligence that William has been developing. Working together, you and your grandson managed to achieve results that neither could have accomplished independently. Your experience provides strategic perspective and negotiating authority, while his knowledge of current market conditions ensures that agreements reflect realistic possibilities rather than outdated assumptions. The collaboration suggests that generational transition doesn't require complete replacement of old knowledge by new methods. Instead, the best outcomes emerge when accumulated wisdom combines with contemporary understanding to create approaches that draw strength from both tradition and innovation. As winter settles over your domain, you find yourself at peace with a life that has encompassed the entire transformation of medieval warfare, from its romantic peak to its practical replacement by more efficient methods. You've witnessed the end of an era that shaped your understanding of honor, duty, and purpose, but you've also helped establish foundations for whatever comes next. The fire in your hall burns as brightly as ever, warming family rather than soldiers, illuminating account books rather than weapons. Tomorrow will bring new challenges as England continues adapting to changes that make your military experience irrelevant. But don't diminish the human virtues that military service was supposed to develop and express. Sitting beside the fire on a cold December evening, watching William work on commercial correspondence while Lady Catherine manages household accounts, you realize that the real victory was never about preserving specific institutions or methods. It was about creating conditions where future generations could pursue their own versions of meaningful life without having to fight the same battles you fought or face the same dangers you survived. The world has moved beyond knighthood, but it hasn't moved beyond the need for courage, honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. These virtues will find new forms of expression in commercial enterprises, scholarly pursuits, and civic responsibilities that serve the same fundamental human needs that warfare once addressed through cruder methods. You are the last knight, in ways that matter more than simple chronology. You represent the end of one approach to organizing society and the beginning of another, serving as a bridge between past and future that allows the best elements of both to survive the transition. Your grandson will build his own version of honor and service, adapted to contemporary circumstances, but rooted in principles that you helped preserve through the chaos of historical change. Looking back from the perspective of old age, you understand that every generation faces the challenge of adapting inherited wisdom to